Chapter 3990. Although the 5-star lords and the foreign races still had the advantage of numbers, they were still surrounded by a group of people. However, when they gathered together, they were surrounded by Ji Tianxing and the others. Many non-humankind warriors huddled together, guarding against Ji Tianxing and the others. They were filled with fear and vigilance. The 5-star lords leading them were too afraid of death and wanted to surrender to Ji Tianxing. They didn't know Ji Tianxing's identity and background. But they were willing to be Ji Tianxing's captives and work for him in order to survive. Even the stars they controlled had to be given to Ji Tianxing with both hands. But Ji Tianxing wasn't interested in that, and he didn't believe in the loyalty of the foreign race's divine kings. Even if he was willing to accept captives and train a group of divine kings as his subordinates, he wouldn't choose these foreign race's divine kings. So, Ji Tianxing decisively refused the 5-star lords' surrender and continued to fight. The 5-star lords and the divine kings and divine lords were completely desperate. They knew they couldn't survive, so they fought back desperately. But this was just a useless struggle. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yarrow, and the others used another 15 minutes to kill all the remaining foreign races experts. After the battle, the space within 50,000 miles became calm again. More than 1,000 foreign races experts had been killed, and Ji Tianxing only collected the divine fragments of 100 divine kings. As for the wreckage of the divine warships floating in the air and the cultivation resources and other resources, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others cleaned them up. Soon, they cleaned up the battlefield. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others counted the resources they found in the 28 divine warships. The total value was more than 3 trillion. Ji Tianxing, of course, took them all. He picked out the cultivation resources and treasures at the divine king level and left them for everyone to cultivate with. He stuffed all the resources below the divine king level into the heaven-mending orb to cultivate the 5 elements world. What made him feel a little awkward was that Chen Yu and the Black Dragon had also dragged the wreckage of the 28 divine warships back. Ji Tianxing did not want the remains of the divine battleship. But Chen Yu said with conviction that the wreckage of the divine warships had to be disposed of, otherwise, there would be traces left behind. This place was too close to Liang Star. It wouldn't be long before the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler noticed the abnormality and found out the truth. Moreover, the divine warship was built with countless precious materials. He could not afford to waste them. Ji Tianxing felt that it made sense, so he stuffed the wreckage of the 28 divine warships into the heaven-mending pearl as well. Without a doubt, the heaven-mending bead was too busy. The hundreds of thousands of pieces of the debris of the stars that Ji Tianxing had stuffed in previously would take more than 100 years to refine. The 3 trillion cultivation resources and the wreckage of the 28 divine warships would take an unknown number of years to obtain. After cleaning up the battlefield and dealing with the spoils of war, Ji Tianxing allowed everyone to return to the divine tower to cultivate and heal their wounds. Then, he steered the sword of burial of heaven back to the blazing sun. He had dealt with the star lords of the 14 stars. Next, he would deal with the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler was in a good mood. When the 14 star lords had come to join him, he had been in a bit of a dilemma. He didn't know what to do with them. Every star in the Heavenly Sun Domain already had a Star Lord. He couldn't free up the positions of the 14 Star Lords to settle them down. Even if he kept the 14 Star Lords by his side, his subordinates were already full, and there weren't that many positions. Fortunately, the 14 stars hadn't been destroyed, and the 14 Star Lords could still return to their original positions. Moreover, he had thought of an explanation for everyone, which would also enhance Lord Supremacy's image and prestige. This was definitely the best of both worlds. He had already thought about it. When he met Lord Supremacy soon, he would definitely report this matter. If he could gain Lord Supremacy's favor, he would be able to reap great benefit. He had never forgotten that it was Lord Supremacy's guidance that allowed him to become a peak divine king. Without Lord Supremacy's guidance, he wouldn't have the power and status he had today. Therefore, he was deeply grateful to Lord Supremacy and was absolutely loyal to him. He would work hard to become Lord Supremacy's most trusted aide. That way, he would be able to leave the Heavenly Sun Domain and follow Lord Supremacy. He would come into contact with more secrets and gain more power. In the past, when Divine King Changfeng was still alive, he didn't even dare to think about this problem. This was because he knew that Divine King Changfeng was Lord Supremacy's emissary and a trusted aide who was highly regarded. However, Divine King Changfeng had mysteriously disappeared a few decades ago, and there was still no news of him. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler had checked Divine King Changfeng's spirit jade tablet and found that it had shattered. Therefore, he was certain that Divine King Changfeng had died long ago. Lord Supremacy also knew about this and sent him a message a few years ago, ordering him to personally escort the cultivation resources to the depths of the void. After all, Lord Supremacy had yet to find a replacement after Divine King Changfeng's death. When the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler received the order, he knew that his chance had come. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. After the 14 Star Lords left the Liang Star, the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler ordered his trusted generals to begin gathering the cultivation resources. The endless cultivation resources were the tributes that hundreds of planets had submitted over the past few decades. Now, 4 days had passed. The 8 trusted generals, along with more than 200 guards, had already gathered the cultivation resources stored in various treasure vaults in the Divine Palace's conference hall. In the spacious hall, there were hundreds of treasure boxes of different colors piled up like a small mountain. Each treasure box was 1 meter long and 1 meter tall, and they all flickered with a faint divine light. There were array patterns engraved on each treasure box, and the name of each planet and the value of the tribute was written on it. There were 2 to 3 interspatial rings in each treasure box, and each ring was filled with cultivation resources. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler didn't need to check each one to estimate the total value of this batch of cultivation resources. The lowest value of each planet's tribute was 5 trillion. The total value of the tribute from more than 800 planets was more than 400 million. Such a terrifying amount of cultivation resources was enough to support the people of dozens of planets. Even though the Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler was experienced and knowledgeable, he was still shocked when he first heard the news from his subordinates. In the past, Divine King Changfeng had been in charge of this matter, and he hadn't dared to overstep his authority. Now that he was personally handling this matter, he realized that the cultivation resources of the entire Heavenly Sun Domain were an earth-shattering amount of wealth. Moreover, this wasn't a one-time thing, but a repeat every 50 years. The Heavenly Sun Domain's ruler paced back and forth in the meeting hall. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought as he stared at the mountain of treasure boxes. Most of the tributes sent by each planet are cultivation resources and materials below the Divine King level. Lord Supremacy has long surpassed the Divine King level, so what does he need these inferior resources for? No, I have to figure out this matter when I go to the depths of the void to escort the cultivation resources. Chapter 3991. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord pondered for a moment, then put the mountain of treasure boxes into his interspatial ring. Next, he gathered a dozen trusted generals for a meeting and gave them some instructions. When all the generals were present, he announced to them that he had to go out for a while. This trip could take as long as 40 to 50 years, and as short as 20 to 30 years. During this time, they had to take good care of the Liang Star and the Heavenly Sun secret realm. At the same time, they had to maintain the peace and stability of the Heavenly Sun Star region. If anyone made a mistake, he would punish them severely when he returned. More than a dozen trusted generals hurriedly acknowledged the order and expressed that they would be loyal to their duties and would not neglect their duties. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord nodded with satisfaction and gestured for them to leave. A few of the generals took the opportunity to flatter him and told him to be careful on the way and to pay attention to his safety. A few generals also took the opportunity to ask him if he needed a large number of guards and a fleet to escort him. When would he leave? The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord said that he was going to carry out a secret mission to serve Lord Supremacy. In order to keep a low profile and keep it a secret, he would leave the Heavenly Sun Star region alone. He would leave early the next morning and did not need anyone to follow him. The generals wanted to curry favor and say more words of concern. However, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord did not want to expose his secret, so he ordered them to leave. After everyone left the main hall, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord also left with satisfaction. He did not know that Ji Tianxing had quietly returned to the divine palace a few hours ago. Ji Tianxing, who was hiding in the dark, had seen everything that had happened in the great meeting hall. Originally, Ji Tianxing was still thinking that if he attacked the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord in the secret realm, he would definitely be surrounded by dozens of god kings. The god kings of foreign races who stayed in the secret realm were mostly intermediate god kings and a few upper god kings. They were unlike the fleet that he had destroyed previously. Although there were more than 100 god kings, most of them were lower god kings. If he attacked in the secret realm, he would definitely succeed and his life would not be in danger. However, he would not be able to keep it a secret and would definitely alarm everyone. Now, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord wanted to escort a batch of tributes to the depths of the void. Ji Tianxing no longer hesitated and immediately came up with a plan. The Heavenly Sun Protector left the Liang Star alone without any attendants or guards to escort this batch of tributes to the Nine God Emperor. Then I'll wait for him to leave the blazing sun star before I make my move in the void. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing waited patiently. Tomorrow morning, he would secretly follow the Heavenly Sun Realm Master and leave the secret realm and planet Liang. However, since he was bored, he secretly tried to find out what the Heavenly Sun Protector was doing in the study. The result surprised him. Just now, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord had told his trusted generals that he had to deal with some government affairs and would leave early the next morning. Unexpectedly, the Heavenly Sun Region Master didn't return to his study to deal with government affairs. After leaving the meeting hall, he hid his whereabouts and quietly flew out of the Celestial Palace. Although the Heavenly Sun Region Lord was a fake peak divine king, Ji Tianxing didn't care about him at all. However, the Tianyang Protectorate Master had managed to fool everyone in the divine palace. Ji Tianxing hurriedly followed the Heavenly Sun Region Lord and flew toward the exit of the secret realm. While he was on his way, he was still pondering silently. How could the Heavenly Sun Region Lord be so cunning and treacherous? How could he secretly leave the secret realm behind everyone's back? Could it be that he sensed danger and realized that I was secretly watching him? Or did he find out that the fleet had been destroyed? Or is he just too paranoid and guarded against his generals and experts? Ji Tianxing secretly pondered for a while. He felt that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord couldn't have discovered that he was secretly watching him. Also, he wouldn't have found out that the fleet had been destroyed so quickly. There was only one answer. The Heavenly Sun Region Lord was too paranoid and guarded against his generals and expert. Chimpage. These sinister and cunning people are all paranoid by nature. They can't be trusted. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. He despised the Heavenly Sun Region Lord. After leaving the secret realm, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord quietly flew high into the sky. It didn't take long for him to pass through the space barrier and enter the vast void. When he arrived in the dark and cold void, he revealed himself and took out an upper-grade king-grade divine warship. This 2,000-foot-long golden divine warship was extremely luxurious and exquisite. It was also set up with countless defensive divine arrays. It was obvious that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord cherished his life very much. He had even built his divine warship into a mobile fortress. Previously, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord had told his trusted generals that he wouldn't bring any attendants or guards and would carry out the mission alone. In reality, there were 6 god kings and 300 elite upper-grade divine lords on the divine warship. These people were his most trusted attendants and guards. The Heavenly Sun Region Lord entered the divine warship and meditated in a secret room. 2 god kings in charge of steering the divine warship steered it into the depths of the void. Everything went smoothly and very discreetly. However, the Heavenly Sun Region Lord didn't know that a pitch-black divine sword was following the divine warship unhurriedly tens of thousands of miles behind it. The divine sword was one with the void. It didn't emit any light, aura, or energy waves. No matter how careful the Heavenly Sun Region Lord was, he wouldn't be able to detect its presence. Time quietly passed. 7 days passed without him noticing. The Heavenly Sun Region Lord's divine warship had already flown 5 billion miles away from Liang Star. He was completely relieved when he saw that the journey was peaceful and that there weren't any accidents. After giving orders to the two god kings steering the divine warship, he prepared to cultivate in seclusion in a secret room. If nothing unexpected happened, he would cultivate in seclusion for 20 years. By then, the divine warship would have reached the depths of the void and he would be able to see Lord Supreme. In fact, when Ji Tianxing learned that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord was escorting a tribute to the Nine-God Emperor, he had considered whether he should intervene. If he didn't, he could follow the Heavenly Sun Region Lord's divine warship into the depths of the void to see what the 5 God Emperors were up to. However, after careful consideration, he decided not to make contact with the 5 God Emperors for the time being. After all, the 5 God Emperors already knew that he had been reborn. It was just that they were being held back by the void and couldn't leave. That was why he had been able to survive until now. However, if he went near the void, it would be tantamount to suicide. Given the nature of the 5 God Emperors, once they discovered his existence, they would definitely destroy him at all costs. He wasn't even a peak God King, so how could he withstand the 5 God Emperors' attacks? With this in mind, Ji Tianxing decided to play it safe and not meet the 5 God Emperors for the time being. He would first play the sidelines and disrupt the schemes of the 5 God Emperors. He would kill the God Emperor's lackeys and indirectly weaken the power of the God Emperors. When the time was right, he would make direct contact with the 5 God Emperors. Therefore, after 7 days, he made his move on the Heavenly Sun Region Lord's divine warship. Chapter 3992. This time, it was the same routine and the same familiar formula. Ji Tianxing sped up to catch up with the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord's divine warship and summoned the primordial chaos bell to seal off the area within 50,000 miles. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the divine bell, which had expanded to 50,000 miles, enveloped the entire area. The divine warship was plunged into absolute darkness and filled with an invisible suppressive force. When the area was sealed off, the terrifying suppressive force enveloped the entire divine warship and reduced its speed by more than half. At the same time, the divine warship lit up with a dazzling divine light and an ear-piercing whistle sounded from within. Evidently, the two god kings operating the divine warship had sensed that something was amiss and hurriedly issued a warning to wake everyone up. Immediately, shouts and yells came from the divine warship. Large batches of Divine Lord Realm Guards also rushed out from the various secret rooms and rooms. The guards and several god kings who were meditating and cultivating in their rooms were alarmed. Everyone gathered together and asked each other what had happened. They also released their divine consciousness to check the situation outside the divine warship. The commotion inside the divine warship was so great that it woke up the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord, who was cultivating in seclusion. He had no choice but to end his seclusion. His face darkened as he stepped out of his secret room in anger. He was even more furious when he saw the divine warship in chaos and everyone's anxious and panicked expressions. "Quiet down, all of you. Shut up." The Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord roared angrily. His majestic voice reverberated throughout the divine warship. The 300 guards and the 4 god kings all fell silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord. The Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord asked in a low voice, "Who can tell me what happened?" The 300 guards didn't dare to utter a word. The 4 god kings didn't know the situation either, but they could only bite the bullet and answer, "My lord, we are still investigating." "Investigate my ass." The Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord frowned and cursed angrily. He released his divine consciousness outside the divine warship to check the situation in the void. His expression changed when he saw that the divine warship was surrounded by pitch-black darkness and that everything within 50,000 miles was sealed off by a pitch-black barrier. Who used a divine artifact to seal this void? Such a powerful divine aura, is it a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact? The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord knew very well that an ordinary king-grade divine artifact could seal off the void. However, there was no way it would be as stable as a mountain without leaking anything. It was even more impossible for it to have such a terrifying divine aura. Therefore, it was very likely that it was a king-grade divine artifact. Most of the people who have a king-grade divine artifact are peak divine kings. Looking at the other party's posture, it's clear that they want to deal with me. Who is it that wants to kill me? In the recent several hundred years, this seat also didn't offend any peak divine kings. The Heavenly Sun Domain Lord remained silent as these thoughts flashed through his mind. He was very vigilant and puzzled. At this moment, in the pitch-black void outside the divine warship, a dazzling golden sword light that could split heaven and earth lit up. Boom! Before anyone could react, the giant golden sword struck the divine warship with a deafening boom. The people in the divine warship only felt the divine warship tremble violently a few times before it broke apart. The terrifying golden sword light had cut the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord's warship in half. Divine light splashed out in all directions from the huge fracture. Countless fragments were thrown out and scattered in the void. More than 30 unlucky guards who happened to be standing near the fracture were killed on the spot by the sword light. Not even their corpses were left intact. They were reduced to pieces of flesh and blood that scattered in the void. The divine warship was destroyed and could no longer operate normally. It could only float in the void. The huge impact caused the two halves of the divine warship to violently tumble in the void. More than 200 guards were dizzy from the fall, and a deep sense of fear grew in their hearts. Only the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord was relatively calm. He knew that hiding in the broken divine warship was useless and would only make them targets. Therefore, he shouted in a dignified tone, "Everyone, don't panic. Hold your weapons tightly and abandon the warship immediately." More than 200 guards and 6 divine kings were his confidants and were absolutely loyal. When they heard his shout, they immediately escaped from the broken divine warship without hesitation. Swoosh! Swoosh! In a short while, everyone had escaped from the broken divine warship and gathered in the void. When everyone gathered, they finally saw that the culprit who had intercepted them was alone. He was a 1,000-foot-tall man from the Dragon Clan who was covered in golden armor. He looked sacred and dignified. He was handsome and valiant, and his entire body exuded an aura that looked down on the world. However, the golden armor covered his face, making it impossible to see his appearance clearly. This made him look rather mysterious. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord and the others heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that their opponent was alone. The worry and fear in everyone's hearts dissipated, and they regained their calm and composure. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord waved his hand, and the 6 divine kings immediately understood. They spread out with more than 200 guards and surrounded the young man. The young man in golden armor was very conceited. He was indifferent when he saw that everyone had formed a circle around him. He had no intention of breaking out. After the circle was formed, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord shouted, "Who are you? Why did you intercept my warship? I don't know you, and we have no enmity between us, right?" He knew that the young man was a peak divine king. However, the young man was alone, and he did not take it to heart. The young man in golden armor was naturally Ji Tianxing. He stared coldly at the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord and said in a deep voice, "Of course, we have no enmity between us, but you are Lu Jiuyang's lackey. You deserve to die." The 6 divine kings and more than 200 guards were stunned when they heard this. Everyone had the same question in their minds. Who is Lu Jiuyang? The others did not know, but the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord knew that the Lord Supreme who had helped him was the 9 Suns God Emperor. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord suddenly understood many things, and his expression changed drastically. "You are Lord Supreme's enemy? You killed Divine King Chang Feng a few decades ago, right?" Ji Tianxing did not deny it. He said coldly, "Divine King Chang Feng is dead. It's your turn now." As expected, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord frowned. He thought to himself that if he reported this news to Lord Supreme, it would be a great merit. However, he did not dare to act rashly as Ji Tianxing was staring at him. He transmitted his voice to one of the divine kings behind him and asked him to send a message. Although he did not know Ji Tianxing, he knew that the young man was Lord Supreme's enemy, and that he was the murderer of Divine King Chang Feng. The divine king was stunned. He transmitted his voice to the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord, "You want me to send a message to Lord Supreme? However, I don't have the corresponding communication jade slip, so I can't contact him." The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord finally reacted. Only he and Divine King Chang Feng were qualified to contact Lord Supreme. He hurriedly took out a special purple jade slip and handed it to the high-level Divine King behind him. The Divine King hurriedly reported the situation to Lord Supreme according to his request. Chapter 3993. When the God King sent the message, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master, who had been on guard against Ji Tianxing, tensed up. He was afraid that Ji Tianxing would suddenly attack and stop his subordinate from sending the message. But reality proved that he had worried too much. Ji Tianxing watched this scene expressionlessly and did nothing. Soon, the high-level God King finished writing the message and was about to send it out after injecting his divine power into the jade slip. But to his surprise, the jade slip floated in front of him and did not move at all. Why can't I send it out? The high-level God King was dumbfounded. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master was also stunned. He turned his head to look at the flashing yet motionless jade slip, and his heart was filled with anxiety and doubt. How can this be? Did the jade slip fail? Impossible. I reported the situation to Lord Supremacy a few years ago. I understand now this area has been sealed, and even the jade slip can't fly out. Only a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact can have such an effect and power, right? The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master looked at the pitch-black barrier that sealed the void and immediately guessed the truth. Although he was slightly regretful that he could not send out this extremely important news, he did not care too much about it. However, he didn't care too much about it, nor did he feel disappointed because of it. In his opinion, after killing Ji Tianxing together, he could still report the news to Lord Supremacy. At that time, his contribution would be even greater. This trip to the depths of the void to meet Lord Supremacy might be his opportunity and fortune. Thinking of this, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Master calmed down and waved his hand to give the order to attack. Everyone, attack together and kill him at all cost. After receiving the order, the guards and God Kings who had been brimming with killing intent and were ready to fight immediately roared and roared. They swung their weapons and attacked Ji Tianxing. Everyone gave it their all and used their most violent divine abilities. They wanted to kill Ji Tianxing in the shortest amount of time, so as to avoid unnecessary trouble. However, just as everyone attacked, the power of the primordial chaos bell suddenly erupted. A vast and invisible force pressed down on everyone's heads, suppressing them to the point that they could not lift their heads or straighten their backs. The surging divine power in everyone's bodies suddenly stopped. The power of their divine abilities and consummate skills were also greatly reduced. Even the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler, who was a pseudo-peak divine king, was weakened by 30%. The 6 high-level God Kings and over 200 Sir Gods had their fighting powers reduced by half. Swish, swish, rumble. Hundreds of divine abilities and sword auras flooded Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing turned a blind eye to it and blocked all the attacks with the hazy golden light around his body. He was completely unscathed as he charged out of the sky full of sword shadows and saber lights. He waved his divine sword and began a massacre. 10 directional vanishing shadows. With a low shout, his body emitted a white light, and 9 identical figures immediately appeared around him. Immediately, 10 Ji Tianxing attacked at the same time, attacking the surrounding divine lords and godly kings. Sword through heaven. Sun-shattering sword. Sword of burial of heaven. 7-star sword. Moon-breaking sword. Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers used different sword techniques at the same time. Thousands of sword auras flooded the Sir Gods. Bang! 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 A series of muffled booms could be heard as countless blood flowers bloomed in the crowd, and minced meat splashed all over the sky. Shrill screams came from the sky full of sword auras. It was especially shrill. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler saw with his own eyes that at least 100 guards were killed in an instant. His heart was filled with fear, and he even had the thought of retreating. As a peak divine king, he could certainly see that Ji Tianxing was alone, but he had used a doppelganger technique to create 9 doppelgangers. What was more terrifying was that each doppelganger had half the strength of the original body, which was equivalent to a peak divine king. What was this? 10 peak divine kings surrounded him and 6 other Sir Gods, and over 200 guards. Just thinking about it made the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler tremble with fear and almost suffocate. While he was in a daze, Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers quickly killed another batch of guards. When the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler came to his senses, he waved his divine saber furiously and attacked Ji Tianxing. More than 220 guards had died tragically. Only 50 guards and 6 Sir Gods were left, and they were still running away in panic. Bang! The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler waved his divine saber and slashed at Ji Tianxing with all his might. However, before the saber aura could reach Ji Tianxing's head, it was blocked by Ji Tianxing's doppelgangers. A 1,000-foot-long golden sword slashed at him and knocked his divine saber away. The saber aura was also shattered. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler wanted to retreat immediately after his attack failed. However, Ji Tianxing suddenly teleported 100 miles away and appeared behind him, stabbing at him with his sword. Sword of Daytime. A dazzling cold light appeared when the sword stabbed out. Immediately after, the cold light expanded by 1 billion times and engulfed the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler. He had no time to dodge and could only form a divine light shield to block the power of the sword. There was no doubt about the result. Even a real Sir God could not block Ji Tianxing's sword. How could a fake Sir God block it? Kaboom! With a crisp shattering sound, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler's divine light shield collapsed on the spot. His divine body was also cut into pieces. Broken limbs and divine blood splattered across the void along with the sword aura. A fist-sized 5-colored godhead flew out in a panic and fled to the edge of the battlefield. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler was not the only one who was stunned by the outcome. Even the surviving guards and 6 Sir Gods were dumbfounded. No one had expected that the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler would be killed in an instant before all the guards and 6 Sir Gods were dead. Although he was not truly dead and his godhead remained, his divine body was destroyed. However, his divine body had been destroyed, and the surrounding 50,000 miles was sealed. There was no way for his divine spark to escape. Isn't the Protectorate ruler a Sir God? How can he be so weak? His opponent is also a Sir God. How can the Protectorate ruler not even block one of his attacks? This thought flashed across the minds of the guards and the 6 Sir Gods at the same time. Even though they had seen it with their own eyes, they could not believe or accept this outcome. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler had always held a high position in their hearts and was also their spiritual pillar. Only now did they realize that this pillar was not as strong as they had imagined. Instead, it was ridiculously weak. Of course, no one cared about what these guards and Sir Gods thought. This was because Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers had killed everyone in the next 10 breaths. Regardless of whether it was the guards or the 6 Sir Gods, none of them could block a single attack from him and his doppelgangers. No matter who was hit, they were instantly killed. None of them survived. After 10 breaths, the void returned to silence. Only the Heavenly Sun Protectorate ruler's godhead was left. It had fled to the edge of the void and was blocked by the primordial Chaos Bell's wall. Chapter 3994. Before meeting Ji Tianxing, the Heavenly Sun Region Master would never have believed that a peak godly king could be so powerful, even though he also knew that his peak divine king realm was slightly overstated. However, he believed that he had accumulated enough strength over the past few hundred years and could be considered a genuine peak godly king. In addition, he had never fought with a real peak godly king before, so he didn't know the difference between them. Only now did he realize that there was a world of difference in strength between peak godly kings. Even though it was humiliating, he had to admit that even 10 peak godly kings like him wouldn't be a match for Ji Tianxing. Is he really just a peak godly king? How can he be so powerful? He is Lord Supremacy's enemy. Could he be like Lord Supremacy, surpassing the godly king realm and reaching the God Emperor realm? The Heavenly Sun Region Master thought about this question as he attacked the Divine Bell's wall. Unfortunately, he couldn't find an answer to this question, and the wall couldn't be broken. After a few breaths, Ji Tianxing finished off all the guards and godly kings and rushed over. Ji Tianxing had already recalled his 9 doppelgangers, leaving only his main body to face the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead. He didn't waste any time talking to the Heavenly Sun Region Master. He waved the sword of burial of heaven, wanting to shatter the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead and end the battle. The Heavenly Sun Region Master panicked and hurriedly shouted with his divine consciousness, "Stop! Stop, I surrender." In his opinion, this overly powerful guy didn't play by the rules. "You've already won, so shouldn't you be showing off now? You're not going to interrogate me for secrets or boast, but you're going to kill me right away. Isn't that too vicious? What grudge do you have against me?" The sword of burial of heaven stopped. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "It's useless to surrender. I don't accept captives." "No, no, no." Seeing how cold and heartless he was, the Heavenly Sun Region Master hurriedly tried to persuade him. "I admit that I was wrong to seek refuge under the Nine Suns God Emperor. However, there is no grudge between us. Why do you have to kill me? There's nothing we can't discuss. We should have a good talk." Seeing the Heavenly Sun Region Lord's strong desire to live, Ji Tianxing raised his brows and asked, "Talk about what?" The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord thought for a moment and asked, "Since you are the enemy of the Nine Suns God Emperor, you must want to know where he is and seek revenge, right?" It had to be said that the Heavenly Sun Region Lord had grasped the main point. The question he raised was indeed what Ji Tianxing was most concerned about. However, Ji Tianxing said in an indifferent tone, "This king knows where he is. I do not plan on taking revenge on him for the time being." The Heavenly Sun Region Master was speechless. He increasingly felt that this person wasn't following the rules. But in order to survive, he quickly changed the topic and said, "Don't you want to know where I'm going and what mission I'm going to carry out?" "I know." Ji Tianxing frowned slightly. He was getting impatient. The Heavenly Sun Region Master sped up and explained, "I'm going to the depths of the void to deliver a batch of expensive cultivation resources to the Nine Suns God Emperor. As long as you spare my life, I can take you to the Nine Suns God Emperor and give you the batch of resources. You should know that the value of the resources is more than 400 million. Even if you are a peak divine king, I'm afraid you have never seen so much wealth, right?" An ordinary peak divine king might have been tempted. However, Ji Tianxing's expression didn't change. He said coldly, "This king said that I don't want to see the Nine Suns God Emperor for the time being. As for the 40,000 trillion cultivation resources, they are stored in your interspatial ring. This king has already obtained them. Do I still need you to deliver them to me?" As he spoke, he opened his left palm. There was an interspatial ring in the middle of his palm. It was the ring that had been left behind in the void after the Heavenly Sun Region Master's divine body had been destroyed. Ji Tianxing had just taken it. The Heavenly Sun Region Master's expression became very ugly, but he still refused to give up. He put on a fierce front and said, "So what if you have my interspatial ring? I only need a thought to make the interspatial ring collapse. The cultivation resources stored in it will also be scattered in the void and the alternate spacetime. You won't be able to get them." The contempt in Ji Tianxing's eyes deepened. He sneered and said, "Is that so? Then why don't you try and see if you can still control this ring?" He held the interspatial ring in his left hand and looked at the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead. The corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. The Heavenly Sun Region Master urged his divine telekinesis to control the interspatial ring and make it collapse on the spot. Unfortunately, the interspatial ring was sealed by an invisible force. His divine telekinesis couldn't contact it. Simply put, he had lost control of the interspatial ring. Ji Tianxing squeezed the interspatial ring again. He urged his divine power to cast a divine technique and forcibly erased the spiritual imprint in the interspatial ring. As a result, the connection between the Heavenly Sun Region Master and the interspatial ring was completely cut off. The Heavenly Sun Region Master no longer had any bargaining chips to negotiate with Ji Tianxing. He despaired on the spot. He watched as Ji Tianxing raised the sword of burial of heaven and was about to silence him. The Heavenly Sun Region Master was extremely anxious. He quickly begged, "I don't want to die yet. Senior, please let me go. As long as you spare my life, I'm willing to be your servant and do whatever you want me to do. If you want information about the Nine Suns God Emperor, I can get it for you." He had once respected, worshipped, and was very loyal to the Nine Suns God Emperor. However, under the threat of death, he was willing to betray the 9 Suns God Emperor in exchange for his life. However, Ji Tianxing had always hated this kind of treacherous foreign race. He didn't need such a shameless servant. He couldn't be bothered to listen to the Heavenly Sun Region Master's nonsense. The sword of burial of heaven slashed down without hesitation. Crack! Although the Heavenly Sun Region Master knew that he was going to die, he still tried his best to dodge. However, he was too weak and couldn't avoid the sword in the end. With a crisp cracking sound, the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead was shattered on the spot, turning into a dozen fragments of godhead. This pseudo-peak Supreme God King had fallen just like that. Ji Tianxing put away the sword of burial of heaven, waved his hand, and sent out a ray of golden light to collect the Heavenly Sun Region Master's godhead fragments. Then, he turned and left. There were many miscellaneous items floating in the void within a radius of 50,000 miles. There were huge wreckages of divine warships, all kinds of resources, treasure chests, and metal fragments. There were also many fragments of weapons and armor, as well as the godhead fragments of the guards and supreme god kings. Ji Tianxing cleaned up the battlefield and cleaned up the void, leaving no trace behind. Other than the 6 godhead fragments of the godheads, he kept them for future refinement. He didn't care about the other spoils of war. He threw them all into the heaven patching pearl, waiting for it to refine them and replenish the power of the 5 elements world. Of course, the heaven patching pearl had been devouring the star fragments and cultivation resources worth hundreds of trillions. The heaven patching pearl wouldn't stop for the next 200 years. The wreckages of divine warships, godhead fragments of divine lords, and divine weapons and armor fragments would probably have to wait for another 200 years. Chapter 3995. Ji Tianxing killed the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord without wasting any time to interrogate him about the heaven-sealing Dragon Emperor. After all, he could refine the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord's godhead fragments and extract his memories. This would save him a lot of time and effort. After cleaning up the battlefield, Ji Tianxing put away the primordial chaos bell and entered the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Next, the Sword of Burial of Heaven left the Heavenly Sun Star Zone and headed to the next star zone. Ji Tianxing returned to the distorted spacetime of the Divine Pagoda and checked his spoils of war. There were 20 trillion worth of cultivation resources stored in the interspatial rings of the 6 superior God Kings. Ji Tianxing picked out the God King level resources and treasures and kept 6 godhead fragments. The rest of the cultivation resources and treasures were thrown into the heaven-mending orb to cultivate the 5 elements world. Ji Tianxing then opened the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord's interspatial ring. The Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord had controlled the entire star zone for nearly 1,000 years and had accumulated a lot of wealth. Although half of his wealth and resources were stored in the treasury of the Heavenly Sun Secret Realm, the interspatial ring only contained half of the wealth. But it was still a shocking amount of wealth, worth hundreds of trillion. Ji Tianxing picked out the God King level resources and treasures and stored them in his interspatial ring. The rest of the ordinary cultivation resources were stored in the distorted spacetime for everyone to use. Finally, he focused his attention on the thousands of treasure boxes. Each treasure box wasn't big, 1 foot long and 5 inches wide. The treasure boxes were exquisitely made and seemed to be of the same standard. Ji Tianxing knew at a glance that these were the tributes collected by the Heavenly Sun Star Zone. Each treasure box contained the cultivation resources accumulated by a star over the past 50 years. Before his death, the Heavenly Sun Protectorate Lord had mentioned that if he spared his life, he would give 40 trillion worth of cultivation resources to Ji Tianxing. This sounded like an astronomical number, but there were thousands of worlds in the entire star zone. On average, each world had 40 trillion worth of cultivation resources, which wasn't an exaggeration. Ji Tianxing opened the boxes one by one and checked the spatial rings inside, as well as the cultivation resources in the rings. He thought to himself, 40,000 trillion worth of cultivation resources is enough for a peak divine king to cultivate for hundreds of thousands of years. What was the 9 Suns God Emperor doing? Why did he need so many cultivation resources? And this was only the tribute from the Heavenly Sun Star region. If the tribute from the divine world was included, the amount would be even more ridiculous. Could it be that the grey fog is a bottomless pit that keeps devouring cultivation resources? Ji Tianxing pondered. When the time was right in the future, he had to figure out the mystery of the grey fog. He spent half a day to count the thousands of treasure boxes and put them all into his spatial ring. After that, he began to cultivate in seclusion, devouring the godhead fragments of the heavenly sun territorial lord and the 6 god kings. Those 6 high-level god kings were not weak. Only 2 of them were in the 7th stage realm while the other 4 were in the 8th stage realm. They had mastered more than 500 types of divine Tao laws. One of the god kings had actually condensed more than 700 types of divine Tao laws. After Ji Tianxing refined their godhead fragments, he took away 40 types of divine Tao laws and his strength increased slightly. Next, he refined the heavenly sun territorial lord's godhead fragments. Although the heavenly sun territorial lord was a pseudo-peak divine king, he was a product of haste and his strength was inferior to an ordinary peak divine king. But he had mastered 900 types of divine Tao laws and had cultivated for nearly 20,000 years. Ji Tianxing not only refined his soul memories, but also took away 30 types of divine Tao laws. Now, the number of divine Tao laws he had mastered had reached 1,070 types. This number had already surpassed his previous life and all the current peak divine kings. While Ji Tianxing was excited, he couldn't help but fantasize. It is said that after the creation of the world, there were 3,000 great Taos in the world, which were then evolved into billions of minor Taos by countless living beings. If one day, I can gather 3,000 types of divine Tao laws, what will the result be? Of course, since ancient times, no one had ever heard of anyone who could gather 3,000 types of divine Tao laws. There weren't even any legends or stories related to this, and no one had ever speculated or estimated it. Ji Tianxing only had a sudden whim, but he quickly dispelled this unrealistic idea. Then, he began to organize the heavenly sun territorial lord's soul memories, sorting out useful clues and information. He originally thought that the heavenly sun territorial lord had some understanding of the 9 suns god emperor and might be able to find out some secrets. But in reality, the heavenly sun territorial lord didn't know the 9 suns god emperor as well as god king Changfeng, so he basically didn't know any secrets. As for clues and information about dragon emperor sealing sky, he didn't find anything. Ji Tianxing analyzed for a long time and finally came to a conclusion. When Dragon Emperor Sealing Sky died 1,000 years ago, he didn't even come to the heavenly sun territory. This result made Ji Tianxing slightly depressed and disappointed. But he quickly collected his emotions and began to look forward to the next destination. Heavenly Lion Territory. Ji Tianxing hadn't been to that territory, but he had heard from the sacred Dragon Emperor that the Heavenly Lion Territory was controlled by the god of the underworld. The territorial lord of the Heavenly Lion Territory was a puppet supported by the god of the underworld. Back then, the god of the underworld had even made the Heavenly Lion Territory wage war in a vain attempt to conquer the Heavenly Stalwarts Territory. But the sacred Dragon Emperor had led the Heavenly Stalwarts Territory's strong practitioners to fight back and ultimately defeated the god of the underworld scheme. The Heavenly Stalwarts Territory wasn't far from the Heavenly Lion Territory. When Ji Tianxing arrived at the Heavenly Lion Territory, he would soon be able to see Ji Wuhan, who was still cultivating there. 1 month later, the burial of Heaven's sword was still flying through the void and was about to leave the Heavenly Sun Territory. At this moment, a piece of news suddenly broke out in the Heavenly Sun Territory, causing many strong practitioners to fall into chaos. The news came from the Liang Star. It was said that the Deputy Territorial Lord had revealed it. It was said that the Heavenly Sun Territorial Lord had disappeared for a month with the entire territory's tribute, which was worth 40,000 trillion cultivation resources, and mysteriously died. At first, all the Star Lords were shocked and couldn't believe it when they heard the news. But the Deputy Territorial Lord had announced the news. Everyone knew that the Deputy Territorial Lord was loyal to the Territorial Lord and was his most capable assistant. Of course, he wouldn't speak blindly. And the Star Lords believed that the 40,000 trillion cultivation resources were true. After all, every Star Lord had contributed 40 trillion worth of cultivation resources. There were 1,000 worlds in the entire Heavenly Sun Territory, which added up to exactly 40,000 trillion. But no one could figure out why the territorial lord, who controlled the entire heavenly sun territory, would take away 40,000 trillion worth of resources. Why had the territorial lord disappeared for a month without any news, and then suddenly died? The territorial lord was a peak divine king. Who could kill him? All kinds of questions filled the minds of many strong practitioners, causing the various worlds to fall into worry, anxiety, and suspicion. Many people thought that this was a fight between the territorial lord, the deputy territorial lord, and the ministers. It seemed that someone was plotting to seize the territorial lord's position. Most of the territorial lords were only concerned about the whereabouts of the 40,000 trillion worth of resources. If those tributes were lost, would every star lord have to hand them over again? Chapter 3996. The entire Tianyang star zone was talking about the disappearance and death of the zone lord. All kinds of rumors and speculations were circulating in nearly 1,000 worlds. The situation began to become turbulent. Many star lords smelled the scent of change and danger, so they gathered their forces and secretly formed alliances. On the Liang star, the deputy zone lord and many generals were also very busy. They not only had to investigate the truth of the zone lord's death, but also calm the chaos on the Liang star and appease the star lords. Even many generals began to secretly form alliances with each other, intending to seize the position of the zone lord. The situation became more and more chaotic. The deputy zone lord and dozens of the zone lord's trusted generals became more and more powerless. Half a month later, when the situation became more and more intense and gradually out of their control, the deputy zone lord began to regret announcing the news of the zone lord's death. If he had known this would happen, he would have resisted the pressure of the generals and kept the news a secret. He would have used decades to gradually take over the position of the zone lord. But now, many generals and star lords were having second thoughts. If he announced that he would take over the position of the zone lord, many star lords would oppose him, and the Tianyang star zone would be torn apart again. Finally, after 3 days of calm consideration, the deputy zone lord decided to report the situation to Lord Supreme and ask for instructions. In the entire Tianyang star zone, only the zone lord could contact Lord Supreme. When the zone lord left the Liang star, he took the special communication jade slip with him. Fortunately, there was a top-secret divine array in a secret room deep in the divine palace. It was a divine array used for communication, and it had only been used once since it was built. When the divine palace was first established, the divine array was set up to contact Lord Supremacy. Early in the morning, the deputy zone lord summoned a dozen of the zone lord's trusted generals and rushed to the secret room. The dozen trusted generals were the experts who had been summoned by the zone lord before he left to guard the Liang star zone and the entire star zone. Apart from the deputy zone lord, these people had the most power. The deputy region master admitted that with his prestige and power, he would not be able to suppress these powerful officials. Therefore, he had to use Lord Supreme Martial Artist as his backing. He believed that no matter how arrogant these officials were, they would not dare to disobey Lord Supreme. After everyone entered the gloomy secret room, they stood in a straight line. The deputy region master personally cast a spell to activate the altar that had a radius of 10 feet. Swoosh! Swish swish swish! Along with the flickering of divine light, the 10-meter-tall altar was successfully activated. 18 resplendent pillars of light lit up, forming a huge mysterious pattern. The pattern was like a sea of stars. There were millions of stars, and among them, there were 9 dazzling suns. As the huge diagram slowly rotated, the millions of stars and the 9 blazing suns also slowly rotated. It was as if the sun and moon rose from the east and set in the west. The deputy region master and the 16 ministers stood with their hands at their sides. Their postures were respectful as they waited patiently. After waiting for a full 10 breaths of time, there were still no changes to the altar or the pattern. Everyone couldn't help but mutter in their hearts. A few of the powerful ministers also began to discuss secretly via voice transmission. What's going on? Why is there no reaction at all? Deputy Region Master said that this divine array can contact Lord Supreme Martial Artist. I wonder if it's true. He wouldn't dare to joke about something like this, would he? Maybe Lord Supreme is very busy and has no time to pay attention to us. I wonder what Lord Supreme's reaction will be when he finds out that the Domain Lord is dead. Just as they were discussing secretly, the pattern of stars and 9 suns above the altar suddenly formed a white light screen. A picture gradually appeared on the light screen, becoming clearer and clearer. Everyone quickly stopped talking and stared at the picture on the light screen, their faces full of anticipation. After a while, the picture on the light screen stabilized and became quite clear. Everyone could see clearly that the picture was a vast dark starry sky, and they could vaguely see the stars in the distance. In the middle of the picture was a huge god that was tens of thousands of feet tall, and his whole body was shining with golden light. The god had 2 feet, 2 arms, and 2 heads. There were also 6 golden wings on his back, and his whole body was surrounded by dazzling divine light. Although the appearance of this god could not be seen clearly, everyone could feel a strong pressure and a sacred aura through the light screen. Behind the golden god, in the dark void in the distance, there was a huge grey cloud. Although only a corner of the grey cloud could be seen, it occupied the entire light screen. The Deputy Domain Lord and the ministers could vaguely see that there seemed to be thousands of gods near the grey cloud, casting spells in groups. There were also many divine ships cruising back and forth, looking very busy. No one knew what the grey clouds were, nor did they know what the gods were doing. However, they knew that the god in the light screen with unparalleled divine might and shining with golden light should be the backer of the domain of Heavenly Son, their Lord. Greetings, Lord Supreme. Without any hesitation, the Deputy Domain Lord and the ministers bowed to the light screen in a very respectful manner. Lord Supreme's face was covered by the golden light. However, everyone could see that his golden eyes were coldly staring at everyone. Who is it? Why have you activated the emergency communication array? A man's voice, which sounded like it was made of metal, came from the light screen. His tone was cold and indifferent, without any emotion. The Deputy Domain Lord and the ministers felt the pressure of Lord Supreme, and their nerves were tense and uneasy. Everyone was silent. Only the Deputy Domain Lord braced himself and explained, Lord Supreme, I am the Deputy Domain Lord of the Tianyang Star region. I have something important to report. Speak. Lord Supreme's words were short, and his tone did not change at all. The Deputy Domain Lord did not dare to talk nonsense. He hurriedly cupped his hands and reported, a month ago, the Domain Lord collected tributes from nearly 1,000 worlds and left the Liang star with 40,000 trillion cultivation resources. He escorted the tributes to the depths of the void to deliver them to Lord Supreme. Originally, the Domain Lord said he would leave the next morning, but he left quietly that night. When we found out the next day, we felt that something was wrong. After that, we tried to contact the Domain Lord every 2 days, but he did not respond. A month later, we realized that something was wrong, so we went to check the Domain Lord's Divine Soul Jade Tablet. Unexpectedly, the Domain Lord's Divine Soul Jade Tablet had been broken. Lord Supreme was still expressionless when he heard this. He asked indifferently, You mean, the Domain Lord of the Tianyang Star region is dead? Yes. The Deputy Domain Lord nodded. Lord Supreme asked again, Did you find out the cause of his death? Who did it? Did you get the tributes back? The Deputy Domain Lord looked ashamed and replied, After the incident, I sent several groups of elite soldiers in the direction of the Domain Lord's departure. They explored billions of miles of the void, but found nothing. As for the tributes, they have disappeared. Chapter 3997. Lord Supreme Master did not react to the news of the Tianyang Protectorate Lord's death. However, when he heard that the tribute worth 40,000 trillion had been lost, Lord Supreme Master frowned and his eyes turned cold. No matter what, we have to find the lost tribute. If we can't find it, we have to collect it again. We can't delay my plans, Lord Supreme Master ordered in a dignified tone. The Deputy Protectorate Lord and the dozen or so ministers bowed their heads in fear and hurriedly said yes. Lord Supreme Master said again, Continue. The Deputy Protectorate Lord continued to report, When we heard the news of the Protectorate Lord's death, we decided to announce it to the public and collect clues about his death. We didn't expect that after the news spread, the stars would not help us with the investigation. Instead, the situation became chaotic. The situation in the Tianyang Star Zone is getting more and more complicated, and it could be torn apart at any time. I am reporting this to you because I want to listen to your instructions." How shrewd was the Nine Sons God Emperor? Of course, he knew that the Deputy Protectorate Lord wanted his approval to succeed the position of Protectorate Lord. He despised the Deputy Protectorate Lord's scheming. However, he did not care who the Tianyang Protectorate Lord was. He only wanted the Protectorate Lord to be obedient and provide him with a steady stream of cultivation resources. Therefore, the Nine Sons God Emperor said expressionlessly, "The position of Protectorate Lord is empty. Naturally, there will be people who covet it and want to take the opportunity to cause trouble. However, I will not allow the Tianyang Star Zone to fall into chaos, let alone delay my plans. Aren't you the Deputy Protectorate Lord? Since the Protectorate Lord is dead, you will succeed the position of Protectorate Lord." When he finally heard these words and got the answer he wanted, the Deputy Protectorate Lord was ecstatic and grateful. Without any hesitation, he bowed and said in an excited tone, "Thank you very much for your appreciation and promotion, Your Highness. Your subordinate will work his heart out, sweat his guts out, and do his best to be loyal to you, and carry out any of your orders." The dozen or so ministers had mixed feelings, especially those who wanted to compete for the position of Protectorate Lord. They were full of resentment. However, Lord Supreme Master had already appointed the position of Protectorate Lord. They could only accept it and did not dare to question it. The new Zone Master bowed and thanked him again before he calmed down. Lord Ji Zun then exhorted, "After you succeed as the Domain Lord, you must first deal with these matters." The first was to recover the lost tribute and investigate the cause of the previous governor's death. If they couldn't get the tribute back, they would collect it again and send their trusted subordinates and elites to escort it back. Secondly, we need to stabilize the situation in the Heavenly Sun Star region. No matter what, we can't let the star region fall into chaos. Of course, the new zone leader nodded his head like a chick pecking at rice. Just like that, the communication ended. The images on the white light screen disappeared, and the constellations and the 9 suns disappeared as well. The altar stopped operating. The new territorial lord turned around and looked at the dozen or so ministers with a smile on his face. He puffed out his chest and raised his head, and said in a proud tone, "Everyone has heard that the Supreme Lord has appointed me as the new territorial lord. Pass down my orders, tomorrow will be the day of my succession ceremony. Also, the things that Lord Supreme Martial Artist has instructed us to do must be done immediately, and must not be delayed." Now that he had become the new domain lord, of course he would flaunt his prowess and be full of pride. The dozen or so ministers cursed in their hearts, but they didn't dare to raise any objections. At the same time, in the deepest part of the void. In the dark and cold void near the enigmatic grey fog. The 9 Sun God Emperor, who had just ended the long-distance communication, stood quietly in the void, frowning as he pondered. A few decades ago, God King Changfeng, who had served me for many years, was killed by a mysterious elite. Now, the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord has also mysteriously died, and even the tribute was lost. When did a peak God King appear in the 9-star regions? How could he have such strength and means? After frowning and pondering for a moment, the 9 Sun God Emperor suddenly thought of something and muttered to himself, "A few decades ago, Yu Ming told us that Kenshin had returned. He appeared on the Reincarnation Island in the Divine Realm, passed through the passage between the two worlds, and fled to the Dragon Realm. God King Changfeng died in the Heavenly Sun Domain, and the Heavenly Scorpion Domain Lord died in the Heavenly Sun Domain. These two domains are very close to the Dragon Realm. Could it be that Kenshin killed God King Changfeng and the Heavenly Sun Domain Lord?" The 9 Sun God Emperor came to a conclusion when he thought of the enmity of the past. Both Azura and Netherworld swore that the Sword God had been reborn. If this news is true, then he should be the main culprit. He didn't dare to seek revenge on me, so he wantonly killed my subordinates to take revenge and ruin my plans. Kenshin, oh Kenshin, so what if you're lucky enough to survive and return? As long as you dare to appear in front of us, any one of us God Emperors can crush you with a wave of our hand. The 9 Sun God Emperor wasn't angry or enraged even after coming to this conclusion. In fact, he didn't feel the slightest sense of urgency or worry even after Kenshin had returned to the peak God King realm. This was because he and the other 4 god emperors had grasped the power of the heavenly Tao and were the closest existences to the heavenly Tao. Even if Kenshin was a peak god king, he was still an ant in their eyes. However, his main body had to stay near the enigmatic fog and couldn't leave. Even if Kenshin deliberately targeted him and took revenge on him, he didn't have any good ideas at the moment. After some thought, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. A few decades ago, Kenshin was still in the Scorpio star zone. He passed through the Sirius star zone and has now arrived in the Tianyang star zone. He killed the ruler of the Tianyang star zone and took the tribute, but he didn't occupy it. In that case, he should have left the Tianyang star zone and gone to other star zones to continue stirring up trouble. The closest star zone to the Tianyang star zone is the Tianyang star zone, which is the god of the underworld's territory. At this thought, the 9-sun god emperor took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the god of the underworld to warn him. On the other side of the enigmatic fog, the cold and powerful god of the underworld, who was tens of thousands of meters tall and emanated a black aura of death, was focused on casting a spell. He constantly released tens of thousands of rays of divine light into a certain area of the enigmatic fog. The fog in that area was slowly dissipating and had already formed a vortex. Behind the god of the underworld were tens of thousands of god lords and god kings, arranged in various formations and working together to cast a spell to help him. In the void of space within 100,000 kilometers, people came and went, and divine warships shuttled back and forth. At this moment, a ray of light flew through the void and landed beside him. As the god emperor, he had far too many matters to attend to. However, he delegated most of them to his trusted subordinates. There weren't many people who could directly contact him, only a few. As soon as he saw the communication jade slip, he knew that something must have happened. And it was no small matter. Chapter 3998. The god of the underworld did not stop casting the spell. He reached out with one hand, took the communication jade slip, and read its contents. When he finished reading the message, his face darkened, and his eyes flashed with a sinister light. Kenshin. It's you again, you damned thief. Back then on Reincarnation Island, you were lucky enough to escape to the Dragon Realm. I didn't expect that you would try to ruin my plans again after entering the Outer Realm. This time, I won't let you succeed. Your time has come. After cursing under his breath, the god of the underworld put away the communication jade slip and summoned a few of his trusted generals. There were 5 of them. The leader was a peak godly king, and the other 4 were all 9th-tier godly kings. They came before the god of the underworld. After bowing respectfully, they asked, "Your Majesty, what are your orders?" The god of the underworld said in a dignified tone, "Set out immediately. Follow me to the Heavenly Lion Galaxy to deal with an enemy." He did not explain much to the godly kings under him. They only needed to carry out his orders. However, the peak godly king in the lead was stunned. He lowered his voice and asked, "Your Majesty, can you leave this place?" The god of the underworld glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "Of course I can't leave. This is an important matter. How can I ignore it? I'll send an avatar to take you there." The godly kings came to a realization and quickly bowed to accept the order. Then, the godly kings followed the god of the underworld's avatar and left the grey fog, rushing to the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. The grey fog was still bustling with activity. It did not affect anything. After all, the god of the underworld had more than one peak godly king under his command. There were even more than 200 high-level godly kings. The god of the underworld's avatar drove a divine ship and hurried along with 5 godly kings. Along the way, the incarnation of the god of the underworld took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the Heavenly Lion sector's leader. This message was to remind the Heavenly Lion region lord to take precautions and prepare for battle. At the same time, he also informed the Heavenly Lion region lord that his clone would lead 5 divine kings to guard the place. Other than that, he also mentioned another person, Tian Shu, who studied under the Heavenly Lion region lord and served as a divine general. This person was the young master of the Heaven Punishing race, one of the top geniuses in the mortal world. Back then, the god of the underworld had saved him from the lower realm and taken him in as his last disciple. The god of the underworld had important matters to attend to, so he could not bring Dub with him to teach him. Thus, he left Dub in the Heavenly Lion Galaxy to be nurtured by the region master. Every 10 years, the god of the underworld would send a message asking about the Sky Pivot. This time, he mentioned Sky Pivot to ask about Sky Pivot's progress. Not long after, the god of the underworld received a reply from the Sky Lion Region Lord. The Sky Lion Region Lord said that he would be on full alert and would not let Kenshin's scheme succeed. As for Sky Pivot, he was now a middle-level Divine Lord, and his strength was improving rapidly. The god of the underworld was slightly comforted by this news. 2 months later, the Heavenly Sun Galaxy had a new Region Lord, and the situation gradually stabilized. The new Region Lord was unable to find out the cause of the previous Region Lord's death, nor was he able to recover the lost tributes. Therefore, the new Region Lord could only order the Star Lords of thousands of worlds to pay the tributes again. The rules were the same as before. Each planet had to hand over 40 trillion worth of resources. As soon as this order was issued, nearly 1,000 worlds were in an uproar. Countless Star Lords cursed angrily, and billions of civilians complained. For a time, many Star Lords united to protest to the new Region Lord. However, the new Region Lord relied on the support of Lord Prime and did not listen to the complaints of the Star Lords. He just kept forcing them. Undercurrents surged in the major planets, and the resistance of the Star Lords and civilians became more and more intense. Although they did not dare to openly rebel against the new territorial lord and the forces under his command, they did not dare to do so. However, they joined forces and secretly agreed that no one was allowed to give in. They had to stall for time. As for how the new Region Lord would deal with it, no one knew. However, the Heavenly Sun Galaxy was destined to not be peaceful. It would definitely become more chaotic in the future. At this time, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had already left the Heavenly Sun Galaxy, crossed the vast galaxy, and entered the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. Along the way, the Burial of Heaven found many abandoned planets with rich mineral veins. However, Ji Tianxing was not interested in them. He had been cultivating in seclusion in the Divine Tower, trying to improve his strength. He was only a step away from becoming a peak Divine King and could break through at any time. However, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had been traveling for 2 months, and he had been cultivating in seclusion for 8 years, but there were no signs of a breakthrough. Ji Tianxing knew that it would be difficult to break through the shackles if he just cultivated in seclusion. If he wanted to become a peak Divine King, he had to obtain some kind of opportunity or experience danger and hardship. 3 months later, the Sword of Burial of Heaven arrived at the central region of the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. Ji Tianxing also ended his seclusion and appeared in the void. There was a larger planet in front of him. There was a spatial barrier and divine light. It must be a world inhabited by living beings. Therefore, he descended on that planet to inquire about some information. He stayed on this star for 10 days. Using all sorts of methods, he inquired about the news from several Divine King powerhouses. Only then did he know that the Region Lord of the Heavenly Lion Galaxy lived in the prosperous Heavenly Lion Galaxy, in the famous Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. That planet was in the central region of the galaxy. If he continued forward, he would reach it after crossing more than 10 planets. The Region Lord of the Heavenly Lion region was a 9th stage Divine King expert. He had tens of millions of elite soldiers under his command and firmly controlled the entire galaxy. Of course, the situation of this galaxy was very similar to that of the Heavenly Sun Galaxy. All the planets were controlled by the Region Lord and trillions of living beings were slaves of the Region Lord and Lord Supreme. They had to constantly collect cultivation resources and hand them over to the Star Lord, who then handed them over to the Region Lord. In addition, on every planet, every continent, and every city in every Divine Kingdom, there were statues of the Region Lord and Lord Supreme. No matter which race they were from, they had to worship Lord Supreme in order to be protected. When Ji Tianxing was inquiring about the news on that planet, he had also seen the statue of Lord Supreme a few times. Although the face of Lord Supreme carved on the statue was a little blurry, he could still recognize that it was the usual appearance of the god of the underworld. There was one thing that had to be said. Many divine kings could use divine abilities and spells to change their appearance at will. However, the vast majority of experts had a common appearance. Just like Ji Tianxing, he used to look like a human youth in the divine realm. After arriving at the dragon realm, he took on the appearance of a young dragon, Long Tian. And now, Long Tian was his usual appearance. After inquiring about the news, Ji Tianxing returned to the void and rode the burial of heaven to the heavenly lion galaxy. On the way, the burial of heaven remembered what happened back then and reminded him, when you were in the divine realm, you went to the dragon realm through the passage between the two worlds on the reincarnation island. The god of the underworld might know about that matter and your rebirth is probably exposed. Although the god of the underworld's main body is in the depths of the void, his avatar can move freely. However, his avatar projection can move around everywhere. I hope that when you go to the heavenly lion star this time, you will not encounter his avatar. Chapter 3999. The burial of heaven's worries were not unfounded. When Ji Tianxing fought with the Heaven Punisher race and destroyed the Heaven Punisher planet, he was stopped by the clone of the god of the underworld. Fortunately, he, Yun Yao, and the others were lucky enough to survive. Otherwise, they would have died in the lower realm. In Ji Tianxing and the burial of heaven's knowledge, the god of the underworld was definitely the most dangerous enemy. However, Ji Tianxing was not worried about this. He comforted the burial of heaven. Not only does the god of the underworld know that I have been reborn, he will also tell the other 4 god emperors. However, they only know that I went to the dragon realm. They should not have thought that I would grow so quickly, let alone that I entered the outer space and was about to reach the heavenly lion planet. Of course, even if the god of the underworld can predict the future and calculate that I will enter the heavenly lion planet, he cannot leave. However, his true body can't leave. At most, he can only send a projection of his avatar to kill me. From so far away, how much strength does his clone projection have left? As long as I don't encounter his true body, I will not be in danger. Since Ji Tianxing was confident, the burial of heaven was no longer worried about this matter. The next 10 days were calm and without any twists and turns. The burial of heaven's sword hurried through the void while Ji Tianxing cultivated in seclusion in the divine pagoda. On the 11th day, the burial of heaven's sword successfully arrived at the heavenly lion planet. There was no doubt that the heavenly lion planet was also a heavenly dipper star with a diameter of 4 billion miles. The surface of the huge planet was covered in golden divine light and was protected by a thick spatial barrier. The surroundings of the planet were silent. There was no sign of any gods or fleets. The entire planet was very peaceful and auspicious. There was no premonition of danger at all. Ji Tianxing ended his seclusion and appeared in the void. He stared at the heavenly lion planet for a moment, then passed through the spatial barrier and entered the heavenly lion planet. Before he came, he had already inquired that the heavenly lion region lord lived in the divine radiance grotto heaven of the middle sky continent. After Ji Tianxing entered the heavenly lion star, he discovered that there were more than a dozen continents on this star. He could only spend 2 days to land on the nearest continent and find out where the middle sky continent was. This was a relatively simple question. He found a random god king of a foreign race and asked the question with some tricks. After getting the answer, he put the foreign race's god king into a coma, and he would only wake up after a month. Then, he went straight to the middle sky continent. 5 days later, he crossed 2 continents before he found the middle sky continent in the depths of the vast sea. Compared with the other dozen continents, the area of this middle sky continent was not large. However, it was located in the middle of the heavenly lion star and was the place with the most divine power. It was the place where the greatest number of divine king powerhouses were gathered. The continent was surrounded by the vast ocean, and it was not connected to other continents. After Ji Tianxing arrived on this continent, he concealed his whereabouts and aura and quietly flew towards the central part of the continent. Along the way, he saw many divine kingdoms and countless cities. Those cities all had ancient histories, but they did not appear to be dilapidated. They were still prosperous and prosperous. Millions of foreign race beings lived in each city, and there was no lack of divine lord powerhouses among them. Every divine kingdom had a divine king powerhouse overseeing it. There were close to 100 divine kings on the entire continent. Although those were all low-level divine kings, and only a few middle-level divine kings. However, it was still very surprising that there were so many divine kings on a single continent. It also surprised Ji Tianxing. After flying in the sky above the continent for a day, Ji Tianxing arrived at the central part of the continent and arrived at the entrance of the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. This entrance was surrounded by boundless mountains, and it was located at the peak of a 1,000-feet-tall mountain. The peak of the towering mountain was opened up into a platform with a radius of 30 miles. The ground was paved with bluestone, forming a plaza. A circle of stone pillars stood around the plaza, and they were connected to the array formation patterns on the plaza's ground, forming a huge defensive array formation. In the middle of the plaza was an altar, and it was shining with a dazzling divine light, forming a door of white light in midair. The door formed by the white light was the entrance to the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. There were close to 100 Divine Lord guards around the altar, and there were also a few Divine Lords standing under each of the stone pillars around the plaza. There were a total of 200 guards, and they were all clad in armor and wielding swords. The 4 guard commanders at the front were all Divine King powerhouses. Among them, there were 2 low-level Divine Kings and 2 high-level Divine Kings. Ji Tianxing remained invisible and hid in the sky to observe for a while. Seeing that the Grotto Heaven's entrance was so heavily guarded, he could not help but frown and think to himself, isn't the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven's defensive power a little too strong? Are they usually like this? Or, did they smell danger and increase the number of guards? The 2 stellar region lords that Ji Tianxing had come into contact with before did not have such grandeur. The defensive power of the Grotto Heaven's entrance was so strong that it was almost comparable to the entrances of the Dragon Emperor's grotto mansions in the Dragon Realm. This made Ji Tianxing wonder if the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had sensed something. The burial of heaven also reminded him in a timely manner, if you feel that something is wrong, then be careful. Ji Tianxing obviously knew this, so he stayed in the sky and observed patiently. He was not in a hurry to sneak into the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. He had time and patience. If the Heavenly Lion Region Lord really sensed something, he would definitely reveal something. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, time passed quietly. Ji Tianxing observed for a whole 7 days. The number of guards in the plaza did not change, and even their positions did not change. In these 7 days, there would occasionally be some Divine Lord powerhouses entering and leaving, their expressions hurried and serious. Ji Tianxing could tell that those Divine Lords were probably messengers, responsible for conveying orders and messages. Other than that, there were also 2 Divine King powerhouses entering and exiting. They were probably kings of some divine kingdoms who had entered the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven to handle matters. All in all, everything seemed normal. Ji Tianxing gradually relaxed his vigilance and thought to himself, just the Middle Sky continent alone has over 100 Divine King powerhouses. This Heavenly Lion planet is abnormally prosperous, and there are many powerhouses. From the looks of it, it should be normal for the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven's entrance to be strong. Therefore, he planned to sneak into the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven to investigate. The method was the same as before. He transformed into a speck of dust and quietly attached himself to a powerhouse's body. On the afternoon of the 8th day, a Divine Lord powerhouse flew over from afar and landed on the plaza. He looked a little anxious, as if he wanted to report some news. However, the guards at the entrance still routinely checked his identity token and interrogated him about his origins and intentions. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing, who had transformed into a speck of dust, quietly attached himself to this person's body. A moment later, this Divine Lord was allowed to pass and hurriedly flew into the white light door in midair. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing also followed this person into the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. Compared to the outside world, this Grotto Heaven's divine power was denser. The mountains and rivers were beautiful, and the scenery was pleasant. Although there was still a gap when compared to the various Grotto Heavens in the Dragon Realm. However, in the starry sky outside the realm, this Grotto Heaven was indeed a cultivation treasure land. Chapter 4000. The Divine Brilliance Grotto Heaven was very big. It had a radius of 500,000 miles. After the messenger entered the grotto heaven, he flew for 200,000 miles before arriving at the palaces in the depths of the mountains. Nearly 1,000 palaces and buildings stood on dozens of mountain peaks, occupying a radius of 1,000 miles. There were at least 50,000 foreign race experts living in the 1,000 palaces and buildings. Among these 50,000 people, most of them were guards and servants in the Divine Lord realm. There were only 50 or so Divine King realm experts. However, these Divine Kings were of higher quality. Most of them were middle-level Divine Kings. As far as the eye could see, the entire palaces were peaceful and peaceful. Under the solemn atmosphere, there was a busy atmosphere. Dozens of guards could be clearly seen patrolling the palace complex. Outside the gates of each palace, at each mountain peak, and at the passageways, there were a large number of guards guarding. Ji Tianxing followed the messenger Divine Lord into the palaces and landed outside an inconspicuous palace. There were hundreds of guards in the palace. The leader was a middle-level Divine King. Ji Tianxing knew that the middle-level Divine King was the guard commander. The messenger Divine Lord he possessed wanted to report the news to the commander. He was not interested in this. His target was not the guard commander, but the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Therefore, he quietly left the messenger Divine Lord and wandered in the sky alone. Although he said he was wandering, he was actually secretly releasing his divine consciousness to investigate the layout and defense of the palaces. At the same time, he was also searching for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. His goal was simple. He wanted to secretly find the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, capture him, and interrogate him for some information. If he could act secretly without alerting the tens of thousands of guards and dozens of divine kings, that would be the best. Ji Tianxing wandered in the palaces for an hour and had a basic understanding of the defense situation within a radius of 1,000 miles. At the same time, he also saw that the area was protected by 3 layers of defense formations. Although the 3 layers of defense formations were all high-grade king-level divine formations. When the 3 layers of defense formations were activated, their power was very close to that of a supreme-grade king-level divine formation. However, this was not a threat to Ji Tianxing. He was using his divine sense to search for traces of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord when he suddenly discovered a figure flashing by outside a palace on a mountain peak. Originally, Ji Tianxing did not care about it. He only cared about searching for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, who was hiding somewhere. However, he suddenly came back to his senses and felt that the figure that flashed by just now was inexplicably familiar. Thus, his divine sense immediately gathered on that figure. Only now did he see clearly that it was a handsome and valiant young man who was over 3 m tall and wore golden armor. The young man looked to be in his 30s. He was neither a human nor an alien race from the outer realm, nor was he a dragon or a god. Instead, it was the Heaven Punishers who should have disappeared. Ji Tianxing immediately perked up. He stared at the young man and observed him carefully. Then, he recognized him as the young master of the Heaven Punisher race, Tian Shu. The moment he saw the heavenly book, his memory instantly returned to 100 years ago. At that time, he had used all of his strength to attack planet Heaven Fa, wanting to completely destroy it. It was Empress Yun Shuiyang who had brought Tian Shu and fought fiercely against him. Although he had defeated Yun Shuiyang and Tian Shu, causing planet Heaven Fa to suffer heavy losses. However, just as planet Heaven Fa was about to be destroyed, the avatar projection of the god of the underworld opened a passage between the 2 worlds and descended into the mortal realm. After that, the god of the underworld saved planet Heaven Fa and chased after Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing had almost died. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others were also killed by the god of the underworld. After the battle, the god of the underworld wanted to bring Tian Shu and Ji Wuhan back to the upper realm. It was the sacred dragon emperor who had acted in time and saved Ji Wuhan. As for Tian Shu, he was naturally brought to the upper realm by the god of the underworld. That year, too many things had happened in that battle. Ji Tianxing and the others had suffered heavy losses. As a result, he had neglected Tian Shu, who had been taken away by the god of the underworld. Today, he actually saw Tian Shu again in the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. What was even more unbelievable was that Tianshu actually had the strength of a 7th-level Divine Lord and had become an upper-level Divine Lord. Ji Tianxing was filled with shock. He thought to himself, could it be that the god of the underworld has taken Tianshu as his disciple? If not for the god of the underworld's personal guidance, how could Tianshu become an upper-level Divine Lord so quickly with his talent and potential? In comparison, Ji Wuhan's talent and potential were several levels higher than Tianshu's. He was a first-rate genius in the world. However, until today, Ji Wuhan was only a middle-level Divine Lord. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing was even more certain that the god of the underworld had definitely taken Tianshu as his disciple. Otherwise, Tianshu would not have such strength and would not have appeared in the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. It was even more impossible for him to have such a noble status. Even if several Divine King powerhouses encountered Tianshu, they would have to bow and salute respectfully. Back then, the god of the underworld made a move and let you survive by a fluke. Seeing you again today, you absolutely can't be left alive. Ji Tianxing stared at Tianshu's figure and secretly made up his mind. His divine sense detected that Tianshu seemed to be in a very good mood and was hurrying to a certain mountain peak in the middle. He had a wide smile on his face and his expression was filled with anticipation. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing also quietly hurried to that mountain peak and secretly pondered, who is Tianshu going to meet? Why is he so happy and filled with anticipation? Very soon, Tianshu landed outside an ordinary divine palace. When the guards guarding the divine palace saw him, they bowed and invited him in. Ji Tianxing hurriedly followed and quietly sneaked into the divine palace, following Tianshu into the depths of the divine palace. Before long, Tianshu arrived outside a certain secret chamber underground of the divine palace. This secret chamber looked inconspicuous, but in fact, it was carefully built and protected by layers of divine arrays. If Ji Tianxing did not observe it closely, he would easily miss it, let alone the person in the secret chamber. At this moment, Tianshu bowed to the door of the secret chamber and said, "Master, Tianshu is here on orders to meet you." There was no sound in the secret chamber. After a few breaths of time, the door of the secret chamber opened. An old voice came from the secret room. It sounded amiable as it said, "Tianshu, come in and talk." Tianshu nodded with a smile and hurriedly stepped into the secret chamber. Ji Tianxing, who was invisible, had already entered the secret chamber before Tianshu and sized up the situation in the secret chamber. In the secret chamber that was surrounded by divine light, there was only a foreign race elder who looked like a dead tree sitting on an altar. The elder in a black robe had a sinister face and exuded the aura of a divine king expert. Ji Tianxing could tell at a glance that the elder was a mid-stage 9th heaven divine king expert. He was the master of the heavenly lion region. However, he was not in a hurry to make a move. He also wanted to hear what Tianshu and the master of the heavenly lion region had to say. After Tianshu bowed to the master of the heavenly lion region, he could not wait to ask, "Master, I have been cultivating in seclusion and successfully broke through to the 7th heaven divine lord realm yesterday. After coming out of seclusion, I heard from the guard commander that you have summoned me because you have good news to tell me." The master of the heavenly lion region nodded slightly and tried to squeeze out a kind smile on his sinister face. He said, "That's right. Your master is coming to the heavenly lion star." Chapter 4001. Suddenly hearing this news, Tianshu was stunned. Even Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment, his eyes flashing with astonishment. Of course, he knew that the Lord Supreme Master that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord mentioned was the Netherworld Divine Emperor. At this moment, several questions popped up in his mind. Why would the god of the underworld suddenly come to the Heavenly Lion Star for no reason? Did the god of the underworld come in person or in an avatar? Shouldn't his original body stay in the depths of the void to study the mystery of the grey fog? Has my whereabouts been exposed and been speculated by the god of the underworld? At this time, Tianshu finally came back to his senses, revealing a face full of surprise. He shouted excitedly, "Is it true? Master is coming back to see me? Ha ha ha. Great. Although in the past 100 years, Master has sent me messages and given me advice several times. But he only came back to see me once, and that was 80 years ago. When Master returns and sees that I have become a superior divine lord, he will be very pleased. Although Tian Shu had lived on the heavenly lion star for nearly 100 years and had long been integrated into this world. But he had no one to rely on, and his only backer was the god of the underworld. He regarded the god of the underworld as his master and father. Naturally, he wanted to see the god of the underworld often. But he also knew that the god of the underworld was carrying out an earth-shattering plan and could not leave. Just like 80 years ago, the god of the underworld came to visit him on the heavenly lion star, but it was only an avatar. Thinking of this, Tian Shu could not help but ask, "My lord, did Master come in person, or did he come in an avatar like last time?" The heavenly lion region lord stroked his goatee and smiled. Of course he came in an avatar. How could the Lord Supreme's original body appear? Not to mention you, even I have never seen the Lord Supreme's original body. Hearing that the god of the underworld had come in an avatar again, Tian Shu could not help but feel a little disappointed and regretful. The heavenly lion region lord saw the change in his mood and comforted him with a smile. "Tian Shu, the Lord Supreme is so busy that he can't appear in person. When the supreme martial artist returns, you must perform well." Tian Shu quickly nodded to express his understanding and asked, "Sir Domain Lord, the heavenly lion starfield has been quiet recently, nothing major has happened, and we have paid the tribute on time. Why would Master return at this time? It shouldn't be just to see me, right?" It had to be said that Tian Shu was not stupid and knew his place. Even though he was the last disciple of the god of the underworld, he admitted that he wasn't that important in the eyes of the god of the underworld. The heavenly lion region lord stroked his beard and said with a smile, "No wonder you can gain the favor of Lord Sovereign. Not only is your talent outstanding, but you are also very intelligent." That's right, Lord Supreme had returned this time to deal with a formidable opponent. Although the Lord Supreme martial artist did not specify who that person was in the message. However, that person had already entered the heavenly lion star region. It was very likely that he would come to the heavenly lion star to start a massacre. Lord Supreme martial artist told us to be careful, but we can't reveal any flaws and alert that person. Hearing this, Tian Shu frowned and asked, "Master is already one of the strongest masters in the world. Who is qualified to be his opponent? By the way, where is Master now? When will he arrive at the heavenly lion star?" The heavenly lion region lord shook his head and said with a wry smile, "Lord Supreme martial artist has always been mysterious. It is not our place to ask how he does things. But since Lord Supreme martial artist sent a message 2 or 3 months ago, he should be arriving at the heavenly lion star soon." "Oh, that's good." Tian Shu was relieved and took the initiative to suggest, "Sir Domain Lord, I will pass the order to the guards to be on guard." "No need." The heavenly lion region lord waved his hand and said with a smile, "I have already arranged everything, you don't need to worry. You just need to stay in the divine palace and wait patiently for Lord Supreme martial artist to return." Tian Shu's eyes were a little dim, but he nodded expressionlessly and said, "Yes, sir." In fact, he knew in his heart that he was just a superior divine lord and was not much stronger than those guards. Even if Master's strong enemy came, he could only be cannon fodder and would not be of much use. The reason why he could become a general and have such a high status was because of Master. In short, Master and the region lord had arranged everything, he just needed to watch. "In that case, I will take my leave." The two chatted for a while more before Tian Shu bowed and left the secret room. Ji Tianxing also left the secret room and secretly followed Tian Shu out of the divine palace. "I didn't expect that the burial of heaven was right. The god of the underworld guessed that I would come to the heavenly lion star and sent an incarnation, and even asked the heavenly lion region lord to be on guard. No wonder the defensive power of the grotto heaven's entrance is not weak." After listening to the conversation between the region lord and Tian Shu, Ji Tianxing understood everything. However, he could not figure out how the god of the underworld knew his whereabouts. Can a god-emperor really use the power of the heavenly Tao to deduce and predict the future? Was it the god of the underworld who deduced this result, or was it the Nine Sons god-emperor who reminded him? If it was the Nine Sons god-emperor who reminded him, that means, the Nine Sons god-emperor has already analyzed that I killed God King Changfeng and the heavenly sun region lord. These god-emperors really can't be underestimated, each more scheming than the other. Through these few matters, Ji Tianxing could be considered to have an indirect contact and contest with the two god-emperors. Only then did he realize that the two god-emperors were not only powerful and resourceful, but also more scheming than before. As for his future revenge plan, he felt even more pressure. A quarter of an hour later, Tian Shu returned to the divine palace where he lived. He was a proud and conceited person. Although the region lord of the Heavenly Lion region spoke in a way that did not embarrass him. However, he still felt that he was being looked down upon and was very unhappy. He returned to his residence unhappily, ignored the guards and servants, and went straight into the secret chamber. Sitting cross-legged in the secret chamber, he did not cultivate. Instead, he muttered to himself, even if I am a top genius and become a high-level divine lord in 100 years, so what? In the Heavenly Lion Star and the entire star region, high-level divine lords are cannon fodder, insignificant existences. Only when one becomes a divine king can one be called a powerhouse and be valued and respected by others. This time, when Master returns, I must ask for a divine king cultivation technique and strive to become a divine king in 30 years. In the future, when I reach the 9th level of the divine king realm, I can replace the old region lord and control the Heavenly Lion Star region. At that time, I will be valued by Master and become his trusted disciple. At this point, Tian Shu secretly clenched his fists, his determined eyes revealing the flames of ambition. However, a low and icy cold voice shattered his fantasy and longing. No, you don't have a chance. Tian Shu was shocked and immediately tensed up. He subconsciously took out his divine knife and looked around vigilantly. Who is speaking? Chapter 4002. The secret chamber where Tian Shu cultivated in seclusion was, of course, heavily guarded. He had never thought that someone would be able to sneak in without him knowing. Moreover, the cold male voice was so unfamiliar. Tian Shu was not only nervous, but his heart was also in his mouth. At this moment, a white light flashed on the ground 30 feet in front of him. A human youth with black hair and black eyes wearing a white robe appeared out of thin air. This person was Ji Tianxing. He did not reveal the appearance of Long Tian, the Dragon Clan's youth, but his true appearance. His hands were empty as he looked at Tian Shu calmly. His face was cold, and there was a cold smile on his lips. Tian Shu glared at him fiercely. When he saw his face clearly, he was obviously stunned. His first impression was that this white-robed youth was somewhat familiar and dangerous. Then, he searched his vast sea of memories for clues related to this white-robed youth. Then, his memories were pulled back to a battle 100 years ago when the Heaven Destroyer star was almost destroyed. All kinds of tragic scenes of blood and fire flashed through his mind. He instantly recovered from his shock and understood the white-robed youth's identity. It's you. You're that damned Ji who slaughtered my people? Tianxing. Tian Shu gripped his divine saber tightly and glared at Ji Tianxing with bloodshot eyes. His entire body was filled with anger and killing intent. Ji Tianxing sneered. I didn't expect you to still remember me after 100 years. Endless anger and killing intent filled his chest. Tian Shu's angry face was distorted. He gritted his teeth and growled, Ji Tianxing, you bastard who deserves to be cut into pieces. Executioner. You heavily injured the Heaven Destroyer star, killed 10 billion of my people, and even killed my mother. This is a blood feud that is absolutely irreconcilable. How could I possibly forget it? Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, who told you that I killed your mother, Yun Shuiyang? It must be the god of the underworld, right? Tian Shu was taken aback. Isn't that the case? He. Ji Tianxing laughed contemptuously and said, I didn't kill Yun Shuiyang. She was forced to her death by the god of the underworld. Back then, the passageway between the two worlds had shrunk, and the god of the underworld was unable to support it. He had Yun Shuiyang sacrifice herself to support the passageway between the two worlds. Only then can the god of the underworld take you away from the mortal world and return to the upper realm. Unfortunately, you fainted long ago and didn't see that scene. T. Sky Pivot yelled at the top of his lungs, refusing to accept the answer. Honorable Master possesses remarkable powers. How could he not return to the upper realm? You are the one who killed my mother. Don't try to explain yourself. Ji Tianxing looked at him sympathetically. He shook his head and said, TSK, TSK, TSK. It seems like you have a lot of trust in the god of the underworld. The god of the underworld used the heaven punishers to kill your mother. Yet you took him as your master and even saw him as your father. This is probably what it means to recognize a thief as your father, right? Shut up. Sky Pivot roared angrily. He stood up and pointed his blade at Ji Tianxing. He growled, no matter how my mother died, it was all because of you. I will return this debt to you tenfold, no, 100-fold. Ji Tianxing still had a smile on his face. He said, although you pretended to be angry and crazy, roaring with all your might, and even releasing your divine power to alert the guards outside, I'm afraid that I won't let my guard down. Let me tell you, it's useless. I've already sealed the secret room. No one will be able to find out what's going on here. Sky Pivot, who had been on the verge of going berserk, instantly calmed down. Deep fear flashed through his eyes. After experiencing so many setbacks and tribulations, he was no longer the hothead who could be easily angered. He knew that Ji Tianxing was definitely a god king if he could sneak into the secret room. Therefore, he had been putting on an act just now to attract the guards. But he didn't expect that Ji Tianxing had already sealed the secret room. Since his little trick failed, he could only calm down and think of a way to deal with it. At this time, Ji Tianxing continued, by the way, you were brought here by the god of the underworld. You must not know what happened to the Heaven Destroyer star, right? Sky Pivot frowned and said in a cold voice, I remember that you and your companions were all killed by my master. How are you still alive? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, I can't tell you this. I can only say that the heavens help the worthy. I'm not fated to die. After the god of the underworld brought you to the immortal realm, I spent a few decades recuperating. At that time, the Heaven Destroyer star's vitality was greatly damaged. Without a leader, it fell into chaos. So, I used the same trick again and completely destroyed the Heaven Destroyer star. This time, no one can stop me. The Heaven Destroyer star no longer exists. Hearing this news, Sky Pivot's eyes instantly became bloodshot and turned dark red. Blood-red flames also rose from his body, and his body began to tremble. This time, it was not an act. He was really angry. He didn't doubt that Ji Tianxing was deliberately angering him. Because he knew that Ji Tianxing was still alive and had become a god-king powerhouse. The Heaven Destroyer star must have been destroyed. Sky Pivot was unable to restrain his anger and was on the verge of going berserk. But reason told him that he was not Ji Tianxing's opponent. He must find a way to save himself. So, he decided to stall for time. Ji Tianxing, after you ascended, you should be in the divine world. How did you come to the Heavenly Lion Star region? Also, did you come to the Heavenly Lion Star region to seek revenge? How do you know that I am not in the divine world but in the Heavenly Lion Star region? If Ji Tianxing answered these questions, he would have to tell a long story. In this way, Sky Pivot could successfully stall for time. But he miscalculated. Ji Tianxing had already seen through his thoughts. Haha. You want to stall for time? Stop dreaming. No one can save you. If it wasn't for the god of the underworld, you would have been dead. And today, he won't be able to make it back. Ji Tianxing sneered and walked toward Sky Pivot step by step. Every time he took a step forward, the pressure emitted from his body would double. When he took a step, Sky Pivot was enveloped by an invisible pressure. With a plop, he knelt on the ground, and the divine saber in his hand fell to the ground. When he took a second step, Sky Pivot's armor and protective divine light collapsed, and his body began to distort. When Ji Tianxing took a third step, Sky Pivot could not even make a sound. His body collapsed and exploded into a rain of blood. Boom! With a muffled sound, Sky Pivot's body was destroyed. Dark red blood splattered all over the ground. Even his godhead collapsed into a dozen pieces and scattered on the ground. Ji Tianxing did not use any weapon, nor did he use any divine ability. He only used the invisible pressure of a powerhouse to kill Sky Pivot. This was absolute power, absolute suppression. The gap between the two was like the moon in the sky and an ant in the ground. After easily killing Sky Pivot, Ji Tianxing dispersed his pressure and divine power and returned to being invisible. He quietly left the secret room without alerting anyone and quickly rushed to the secret room where the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was. Chapter 4003. If the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not alert, he should still be in the secret chamber at this moment. Ji Tianxing went to kill Tian Shu and only delayed about 15 minutes. He thought that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord should not have reacted yet. After all, when he killed Tian Shu, no one was alarmed. But after 100 breaths of time, when he arrived outside the secret chamber, he frowned, his eyes somewhat gloomy. Because his divine sense passed through the door of the secret chamber and sensed that the aura inside was somewhat strange. The aura of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord seemed to have disappeared. This was not a good thing. Ji Tianxing hurriedly cast a spell to crack the divine array of the secret chamber's door and decided to break in to see what was going on. As for the 4 guards guarding the door of the secret chamber, they were naturally knocked out by him using a divine ability secret art. In a short while, Ji Tianxing cracked the array of the secret chamber's stone door and opened the stone door. Creak, creak, creak. As soon as the stone door opened a crack, Ji Tianxing stepped inside. His divine sense enveloped the entire secret chamber, searching for traces of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. However, the situation was as he expected. The secret chamber was empty, and the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had long disappeared. This result undoubtedly confirmed that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had sensed that something was wrong and hid. Confirming that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not in the secret chamber, Ji Tianxing immediately left the secret chamber and flew out of the divine palace. At the same time, he released an invisible divine sense and spread out in all directions, searching for the whereabouts of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. At this time, a loud bugle horn suddenly sounded around the divine palace. Thousands of divine Lord Realm Guards emerged from the palaces in all directions and quickly gathered in the sky. Immediately after, bugle horns sounded from various mountain peaks in the distance, waking up countless guards. The rapid and powerful bugle horn indicated that a strong enemy was attacking. Therefore, in a short period of time, the thousands of guards guarding the various palaces and passageways had completed their assembly. Later, more than 10,000 guards flew into the sky, forming a 1,000-mile encirclement, surrounding the entire palace complex. The divine palace where Ji Tianxing was located was heavily surrounded and was in the center of the encirclement. The first layer of encirclement had nearly 1,000 guards, the second layer of encirclement had 5,000 guards. As for the third layer of encirclement, there were more than 10,000 guards surrounding the entire palace complex. As for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, he was standing in the sky above the divine palace with over 20 divine king experts, looking down. Ji Tianxing was in an invisible state and would not be discovered by the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. However, the Region Lord of the Heavenly Lion Region had his hands behind his back. With a confident posture, he shouted in a dignified tone, "Don't hide anymore. I have already seen through your whereabouts. Show yourself obediently." On the surface, it seemed that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had seen through Ji Tianxing's disguise by shouting at the divine palace beneath his feet. But in reality, the Sky Lion Region Lord's eyes were unfocused and somewhat empty. Ji Tianxing naturally knew that this was the Heavenly Lion Region Lord bluffing, deliberately luring him to appear. Under normal circumstances, he should not show himself now. He should wait for the Heavenly Lion Region Master to lose his cool and then try to escape from the encirclement. However, in Ji Tianxing's opinion, with just these 20,000 guards and dozens of divine kings, it was impossible to stop him from capturing the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Moreover, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was already on guard. If he did not show himself, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord might escape. Most importantly, the clone of the god of the underworld had set off for the Heavenly Lion Star as early as 3 months ago. The longer he delayed, the more dangerous it would be. To Ji Tianxing, the only one who could truly be considered dangerous was the clone of the god of the underworld. Therefore, Ji Tianxing no longer hid and showed himself openly. Swoosh! In a flash of white light, he flew to the top of the divine palace and stood 1,000 feet away from the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, revealing himself. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the 20 Divine Kings immediately tensed up and stared at him vigilantly. Before Ji Tianxing could speak, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord said with a smile, "You thought that you had entered the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven without anyone noticing. You didn't expect that I had been waiting for you for a long time." At this moment, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord appeared quite confident, as if victory was in his grasp. Originally, the Divine Kings and Guards were still a little nervous. Infected by the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's aura, they also regained their confidence and calmness. Ji Tianxing looked at the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and said with an indifferent expression, "Don't flatter yourself. If the god of the underworld had not sent you a message, how would you know?" "Oh right, did the god of the underworld tell you who I am? Do you know where I came from, why I came, and what realm I am in?" Obviously, the god of the underworld did not tell the Heavenly Lion Region Lord these things. Firstly, he did not want to explain too much to his subordinates. Secondly, he was afraid that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord would be timid and make a fool of himself. If the Heavenly Lion Region Lord knew that a peak Divine King was about to sneak into the Heavenly Lion Star to assassinate him, who knew how scared he would be? Hearing Ji Tianxing's question, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was stunned for a moment and could not answer. He had already seen that Ji Tianxing's strength was unfathomable. His aura was very mysterious and reserved. His realm was definitely higher than his. He was a 9th-level Divine King, then Ji Tianxing must be a peak Divine King. At the thought of this, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's heart also jumped, and his confidence disappeared by more than half. However, he did not dare to show his timidity and guilt. He still maintained a confident posture and sneered, "I don't need to know this. I only need to know that you have walked into a trap and will die without a doubt. No matter who you are, no matter what kind of strength you have, you are all alone. And under my command, there are dozens of Divine Kings and tens of thousands of Divine Lord Realm Guards. Even if you have great ability, today you will be smashed to pieces and buried here." Ji Tianxing saw that he was fierce in appearance and said with a sneer, "Since you are so confident, what are you waiting for?" The Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not stupid. He naturally knew that the longer the time was delayed, the more advantageous it was for him. If they fought with Ji Tianxing now, even if they were destined to win, they would have to pay a terrible price. A peak Divine King killing close to 10,000 guards and 20 to 30 Divine Kings on the spot in a life-and-death battle was still no problem. However, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was not willing to bear such tragic consequences. Therefore, he chose to continue delaying time. "Although you alone can't fight so many elite guards of this seat, victory is destined to belong to us. But you are a cornered beast, and your counterattack at the brink of death will still make us pay a considerable price. This seat is a good region lord who loves the people like children. I have always taken pity on the lives of the soldiers under my command. Therefore, this seat still hopes that you have self-awareness and can take the initiative to admit defeat and surrender. This seat will give you a dignified death. This is good for everyone." The Heavenly Lion Region Lord looked at Ji Tianxing with an indifferent expression and said these words that inspired reverence for righteousness. Those 20 over Divine Kings and 20,000 guards were actually somewhat moved and grateful to his word. But Ji Tianxing revealed a disdainful smile. "Want to delay time? Dream on." Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 4004. The Sky Lion Region Master wanted to stall for time until the god of the underworld returned. However, Ji Tianxing could not let this happen. He had to end the battle quickly. After shouting coldly, he made the first move. He opened the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and opened a space tunnel. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others who were ready for battle flew out one by one. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Divine light flickered, and 11 godly kings appeared behind Ji Tianxing. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Chao Qingyu, Yank, Lan Bai Feng, Shui Huan, Lin Shui, and the others all appeared. Even Black Dragon and Qian Yu appeared. Although they had all suffered light or heavy injuries the last time they fought, they were still able to fight back. However, during the few months that the Sword of Burial of Heaven traveled, They had been in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for many years to recuperate. Their injuries had long healed. The repeated life-and-death battles had benefited everyone greatly, and their strength had increased rapidly. Therefore, when everyone knew that Ji Tianxing had entered the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven, they took the initiative to request to participate in the battle. Of course, Ji Tianxing would not reject everyone's request. Seeing the sudden appearance of 11 godly kings, the Sky Lion Region Master, more than 20 godly kings, and close to 1,000 guards around them all revealed intense fear. I knew that things would not be so simple. Even if this guy is a peak godly king, how could he act alone? The Sky Lion Region Master's face was gloomy as he gritted his teeth and muttered. More than 20 godly kings also gripped their divine weapons tightly. Boundless divine power was accumulated in their bodies, and they were ready to attack. The hearts of the 1,000 godly lords also sped up. They were filled with fear and worry. At this moment, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yaro, Ji Ku, and the others had already discussed the battle strategy through voice transmission. Without needing anyone to give the order, Ji Tianxing took the lead and swung his sword at the Sky Lion Region Master and the others. Yun Yaro, Ji Ku, Bai Feng, and the others immediately attacked as well. They used all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills to attack the surrounding guards. An intense battle instantly broke out. 10 directional vanishing shadows. Ji Tianxing's body flickered with white light, and 9 doppelgangers instantly appeared. Including his original body, a total of 10 people charged towards the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the 20-odd God Kings behind him. The strategy that he had discussed with Yun Yaro and the others was that he would deal with the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and those God Kings. Their goal was to get rid of the several thousand guards in the surroundings and the 10,000 guards in the outermost circle. Seeing Ji Tianxing rushing over alone, although the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was worried, he did not panic. After all, he was confident that he could defeat Ji Tianxing if he teamed up with more than 20 God Kings. However, he saw that Ji Tianxing had actually created 9 clones. Moreover, each of the clones had the strength of a peak divine king. This was equivalent to 10 peak divine kings going against him and over 20 divine generals. This was too much. In an instant, the hearts of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the other God Kings were in their throats, and they were filled with fear. Heavenly Dragon Palm, 7-star Sword, Broken Moon Sword, Burial of Heaven Sword, Daylight Sword, Heavenly Dragon Slash. Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers used different divine abilities and ultimate skills at the same time. They unleashed a sky full of fist radiance, palm shadows, and countless sword beams. A violent aura that could destroy heaven and earth instantly enveloped the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the others. They did not have time to dodge or escape, so they could only fight with all their might. They used their trump cards and ultimate skills to resist with all their might. Bam! 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 Boom! Boom! Hundreds of divine abilities and ultimate skills collided in the sky, creating a deafening explosion and blooming with dazzling divine light. A violent shockwave swept out in all directions, carrying countless fragments of divine light. It was like a shocking flood. The deafening explosion reverberated between heaven and earth. In just one exchange, the divine abilities used by the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and over 20 God Kings were defeated by Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers. The shock wave from the collision of divine abilities blasted the 1,000-foot mountain peak under everyone's feet into a pile of yellow soil, and dust filled the air. More than a dozen palaces and mansions on the mountain peak were also reduced to rubble and powder. Even the nearby mountain peaks were affected and collapsed on the spot. Fortunately, within a 1,000-mile radius, every mountain peak had a powerful defensive divine array. Otherwise, the shock wave from the battle between the two sides would not be as simple as destroying a few mountain peaks. One exchange would probably destroy everything within a 1,000-mile radius. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and over 20 middle and upper God Kings were repelled by Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers. All of them were pale. Before they could accumulate divine power and launch a counterattack, Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers launched another fierce attack. Galaxy Break, Spacetime Blade, Starry Sky Fall. Raging flames burn the sky. The 10 Ji Tianxing attacked at the same time, using all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills to besiege the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and over 20 God Kings. In an instant, a few God Kings were hit. Their divine light shields and armor were destroyed by the sword shadows, and their bodies were cut into several pieces. Shrill screams erupted one after another. Dark red and dark golden blood splattered and scattered across the sky. In the second exchange, 6 God Kings died on the spot. Not even their bones were left. The 9 God Kings were severely injured. Their bodies were drenched in blood and they looked miserable. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord began to panic. He no longer led the charge. He shouted that he would charge bravely, but in fact, he was hiding behind the many God Kings. Of course, his most trusted divine generals were still shouting loudly, asking the many God Kings to protect the Region Lord. Without a doubt, the actions of these divine generals had won the approval and admiration of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Very quickly, the third battle began. The Tenji Tianxing were still as fast as lightning, fierce and domineering. The divine abilities and ultimate skills they used were still unparalleled. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the dozen God Kings, whose morale had plummeted, were no match for him at all. After a series of earth-shattering explosions, a few more God Kings were killed on the spot. All the God Kings, including the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, were severely injured. Their strength began to weaken. In fact, the number of people on both sides was even. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord was completely flustered. He no longer ordered the 9 God Kings to charge. Instead, he let the 9 God Kings cover him and escape from the battlefield first before making further plans. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing and the 9 clones surrounded them, leaving them with nowhere to run. Helpless, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord could only order the God Kings guarding the various divine palaces to come and help. After all, there were more than 50 God Kings in the Divine Splendor Grotto Heaven. Among them, 30 God Kings were hiding in the various divine palaces, guarding the various treasure vaults and secret places. In the beginning, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord did not expect Ji Tianxing to be so powerful, so he did not summon the God Kings. He thought that he and the 20 God Kings would be able to deal with the powerful enemy. But now, it seemed that if the 30 God Kings did not come to help, he would probably die here. As the Heavenly Lion Region Lord shouted, 30 rays of divine light flew out from the mountain peaks and palaces in all directions. The 30 mid and high God Kings all rushed to the center of the battlefield to rescue the injured Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Chapter 4005. While Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers were attacking the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the others, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others were also quickly killing the thousands of guards around them. Yun Yarrow held 2 swords in her hands as her white robe fluttered in the wind. She used all kinds of divine powers and sword techniques. There was an indescribable sense of elegance, spirituality, and holiness. Ji Ku held the Inferno Divine Spear in his hand as his body was surrounded by 5-colored divine flames. He was like a phoenix that had descended and burned all his enemies. Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, Yank, and the others also used their own unique skills to kill the foreign guards expressionlessly. Qian Yu and the Black Dragon were weaker, but they were the largest and the commotion they caused was also the largest. They soared in the sky and released ice blades and frost swords that covered the sky. They turned the area within 1,000 miles into a sea of fire that was surrounded by divine light. In just a few minutes, the thousands of divine Lord Guards were killed by Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others. At this moment, 30 foreign race divine kings rushed over from all directions to rescue the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. 7 of the 9 divine kings that were guarding the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had been killed by Ji Tianxing. Only 2 of them were left. He watched as the 30 God Kings charged towards Ji Tianxing and his 9 avatars without any regard for their own safety. Under the protection of the 2 divine kings, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was prepared to escape the battlefield and fly into the distance. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others immediately wanted to stop the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. This was because they knew that Ji Tianxing's target was the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. They could not let him escape. However, Ji Tianxing sent a voice transmission in time and said to everyone, "Don't worry. I will take care of him." "You guys be careful of the 5,000 guards." As expected, the 5,000 guards in the second layer of encirclement also received the order from the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. They roared and shouted as they charged into the battlefield without any regard for their own safety. They surrounded Ji Tianxing, Yun Yarrow, and the others. There was only one purpose. That was to stall Ji Tianxing, Yun Yarrow, and the others, giving the Heavenly Lion Region Lord the opportunity and time to escape. As for letting the 5,000 guards kill Ji Tianxing and the others, the Region Lord of the Heavenly Lion Region didn't even think about it. Rumble. Bang 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 bang. Soon, the 5,000 guards and Yun Yarrow's group began to fight, creating earth-shattering noises. The area within a radius of 1,000 miles was in chaos, completely flooded by divine light and flames. Mountain peaks collapsed one after another, turning into piles of scorched earth. After this battle, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's cave residence and palace complex were completely destroyed. However, the most important thing right now was not the destruction of the palace, but rather, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord, who had just seen a glimmer of hope for survival, fell into despair in the blink of an eye. The 30 foreign race god kings held back Ji Tianxing and his 9 clones. Under the protection of 2 god kings, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord successfully escaped from the battlefield. He escaped 1,000 miles away and flew out of the encirclement formed by more than 10,000 guards. He turned to look at the middle of the battlefield and saw that many Ji Tianxing were still fighting with the foreign race god kings. He heaved a long sigh of relief. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and he even felt as if he had escaped from death. As long as they can delay for a few hours, maybe Lord Supreme will come back. This thought flashed through the Heavenly Lion Region Lord's mind, with a strong sense of hope and anticipation. However, just as this thought flashed through his mind, his vision blurred, and he saw a golden light flash in front of him, and a figure appeared out of thin air. A handsome and valiant young man from the Dragon Clan clad in golden armor. Moreover, this was not a clone, but a real body. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord trembled, and his nerves instantly tensed up. He never thought that Ji Tianxing could easily escape from the encirclement of 30 god kings and teleport in front of him. This was too terrifying. In his panic, his first reaction was to turn around and run. However, Ji Tianxing had already released an invisible pressure, sealing off a radius of 10,000 miles. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the 2 god kings beside him were suppressed to the point that their faces were pale and they could not move. The 3 of them desperately wanted to escape, but their movements were extremely slow and their bodies were extremely stiff. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing raised his right hand and used the heaven-capturing dragon claw to capture the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord's eyes were bloodshot as he roared angrily. The 2 injured god kings no longer turned around to escape. Instead, they pounced on Ji Tianxing without any regard for their own safety. They knew that they were powerless to stop Ji Tianxing, so they self-destructed. They wanted to use their lives to stop Ji Tianxing and stall for time for the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Seeing that the 2 god kings' bodies were ignited with blood flames, their bodies swayed violently, and their divine sparks also erupted with violent power. They were like violently inflated balloons that could explode at any time. Although Ji Tianxing was not afraid of the self-destruction of the 2 god kings, his life would not be in danger. But a few hundred miles away, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang and the rest were still fighting with thousands of guards. The self-destruction of 2 8th-stage realm god kings would definitely destroy a radius of 10,000 miles. If Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the rest were affected, half of them would die and the other half would be severely injured. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to use the heaven-capturing dragon claw to grab the 2 god kings. Before the 2 god kings could self-destruct, he unleashed a terrifying power and forcefully crushed the 2 of them. Boom! In the crisp sound of the explosion, the 2 god kings were crushed into pieces and blood splattered everywhere. Even their divine sparks were crushed on the spot and scattered in the huge golden dragon claw. The 2 god kings were dead and the crisis was resolved. Ji Tianxing kept their divine sparks and chased after the Heavenly Lion Region Lord who was desperately escaping. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord, driven by his desire to live, had already exploded with all his potential and teleported continuously high in the sky. With the help of a king-level high-grade divine artifact, he had already escaped more than 30,000 miles. In order to survive, he no longer cared about his dignity and dignity. He would rather abandon tens of thousands of guards and 30 god kings. Of course, that was not abandonment, that was sacrifice. He wanted to sacrifice those tens of thousands of guards and 30 god kings to buy himself time to escape. As he fled, he was still praying in his heart. I hope that guy is delayed and doesn't chase after me. Even if he kills everyone in the divine splendor grotto heaven, I can't die. But unfortunately, the heavenly lion region lord's prayers were destined to be useless. Ji Tianxing also teleported continuously high in the sky and chased after the heavenly lion region lord at an even more unbelievable speed. In a short 5 breaths, both parties flew more than 10,000 miles. Finally, Ji Tianxing appeared in front of the heavenly lion region lord and easily intercepted him. Bam! The heavenly lion region lord only saw a mountain-sized dragon elephant phantom appear in front of him. Before he could dodge, he was blasted back. Plop! He flew a few hundred miles and smashed into a 1,000-foot mountain peak, causing smoke and dust to fly up into the sky. When he crawled out of the ruins, he was already covered in blood. His hair was disheveled and he was in an extremely sorry state. At this moment, Ji Tianxing appeared in front of him. He waved his hand and shot out a golden dragon claw to capture him. The heavenly lion region lord could no longer dodge or resist. He was imprisoned by the golden dragon claw and could not move. End of chapter. Chapter 4006. After the heavenly lion region lord was captured, he knew that he would not be able to escape and was filled with despair. He waited for a long time and prayed that the god of the underworld would arrive in time. However, a miracle did not appear. Even so, he did not give up hope and continued to struggle. Now that I have fallen into your hands, shouldn't you at least reveal your name and title? Lord Supreme calls you a formidable opponent. Don't tell me you don't even have the courage to do so. The heavenly lion region lord glared at Ji Tianxing unwillingly and roared in a hoarse voice. He asked this question because he wanted to know more about his death and also because he wanted to stall for time. Ji Tianxing ignored him and released his divine power to imprison his divine body and divine spark. Then, he carried him and flew back. Soon, the two of them returned to the battlefield. Above the ruins within a radius of 1,000 miles, the battle was still ongoing. Ji Tianxing's 9 doppelgangers had killed 20 of the 30 godly kings from the foreign tribes. The remaining 10 god kings who were riddled with wounds were all terrified. They no longer dared to fight, dodging and fleeing the entire time. 5,000 godly lords had surrounded Yun Yarrow and the others for so long, but they had not killed anyone. On the contrary, the number of guards had been reduced to around 2,000. As for Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others, although they were covered in blood and looked miserable, they were not seriously injured. The blood that soaked their hair and clothes belonged to the foreign tribes' guards. Ji Tianxing carried the imprisoned heavenly lion region lord and flew into the sky above the battlefield. He shouted, "Stop! Your region lord has been captured by me. If you don't stop, I will kill him." As his voice spread in all directions, more than 2,000 foreign tribes were stunned. Everyone stopped fighting and looked up at the sky. Their gazes fell on Ji Tianxing. Seeing that the wretched heavenly lion region lord had been captured by Ji Tianxing, the guards and the 10 godly kings lost all hope. Even the domain lord was heavily injured and captured by a strong enemy. What reason did they have to continue fighting? All of a sudden, the morale of these non-humankind warriors vanished. Everyone stopped fighting and killing. Even the 10,000 guards on the outer ring lowered their hands and put down their weapons. Peace was restored between heaven and earth. Ji Tianxing recalled his 9 clones and summoned the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda, allowing Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others to return to the distorted spacetime to recuperate. When they received this order, Qian Yu, Black Dragon, and White Dragon were still somewhat unsatisfied. They were still in the midst of fighting and hadn't enjoyed themselves to the fullest. However, they knew that Ji Tianxing had plans, so they obeyed his orders and entered the divine pagoda one by one. Soon, only Ji Tianxing was left on the battlefield, facing more than 10,000 guards alone. Of course, There were also 30,000 guards and servants who had fled far away when the mountains and palaces collapsed. Those 30,000 people hid tens of thousands of miles away and were nervously watching the situation on the battlefield. To put it simply, Ji Tianxing was facing more than 40,000 non-humankind warriors from the divine splendor grotto heaven alone. However, his aura was too majestic and powerful. It suppressed the entire battlefield, causing everyone to be filled with fear and not dare to resist. Ji Tianxing looked around and looked at the domain lord of the Heavenly Lion region. He sneered and said, "Do you see? Just now, you abandoned everyone and ran for your life alone. Now, I have captured you, but none of these divine emperors came to save you." The domain lord of the Heavenly Lion region was sad and a little angry. However, he didn't show it. He said with a solemn expression, "Your target is me, not my people. If this seat's death can give them a way out, this seat will not shirk my duty." Hearing his impassioned words, the tens of thousands of non-humankind warriors were moved. Many of them looked ashamed. However, Ji Tianxing frowned and said in a low voice, "You are still acting when you are about to die. You are really a hypocrite. Forget it, I don't want to waste my time with you." After he finished speaking, he carried the domain lord of the Heavenly Lion region and flew toward the exit of the divine splendor grotto heaven. The domain lord of the Heavenly Lion region thought for a moment and felt that the situation was a little strange. He asked, "I have no enmity with you. Why did you attack me? You captured me but didn't kill me. What do you want?" Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "You are the god of the underworld's lackey, so I want to deal with you. I didn't kill you because you are still useful." The domain lord of the Heavenly Lion region said in a low voice, "So, your target is Lord Supreme, and I am just an innocent victim? Then why did you leave the divine splendor grotto heaven in such a hurry? Are you afraid that Lord Supreme will turn you into ashes when he returns?" Ji Tianxing sneered and said, "You are waiting for the god of the underworld to come, and so am I. However, I will not wait for him in the divine splendor grotto heaven. I want to take the initiative." The domain lord of the Heavenly Lion region vaguely understood something and guessed that Ji Tianxing had follow-up plans and conspiracies. But that had nothing to do with him. It was all to deal with the god of the underworld. He asked again, "Until now, you still haven't told me who you are. You are not qualified to know my honorific title." Ji Tianxing glanced at him coldly and waved his hand to strike him. Bang! With a muffled sound, the domain lord of the Heavenly Lion region fainted on the spot and stopped talking. Ji Tianxing flew toward the exit of the grotto heaven while dealing with the domain lord. He threw him into the third level of the Jiutian Tenju Tower. In that space, the evil soul divine king was still suppressed, and he was still alive. Now that both of them were suppressed inside, they had company. At this moment, the sky in front of Ji Tianxing suddenly lit up with a divine light. There was also a loud and majestic voice that came from the exit of the grotto heaven. "Kenshin, since you are here, stay." The sudden voice reverberated between heaven and earth within a radius of 100,000 miles. Ji Tianxing's pupils constricted immediately. He stopped in the sky and stared at the divine light that was rapidly approaching. There were actually 6 figures in that divine light within a radius of 100 miles. The divine light kept flashing high in the sky. Every time it flashed, it would teleport 20,000 miles away. In just a few breaths, the divine light swept across the sky and arrived in front of Ji Tianxing. Swoosh! After the bright golden divine light dissipated, 6 figures appeared. They were 100 miles away from Ji Tianxing, facing each other in the sky. Both sides stared at each other and sized each other up. Among the 6 experts, 4 were from the god race of the god world, and 2 were foreign races from the starry skies. The leader was a burly middle-aged man who was more than 10 feet tall. This person was dressed in a black robe and wore a black ghost mask. He wore a luxurious divine crown on his head. His body was surrounded by a black death aura and the space around him was empty. The empty space of 30 feet could isolate divine sense from probing and resist the invasion of various divine powers. There was no doubt that this black-robed, ghost-masked man was one of the avatars of the god of the underworld. Following behind the god of the underworld were 5 people. There was a peak divine king from the god clan, 2 ninth-degree divine kings from the God clan and 2 ninth-degree divine kings from the alien clan. End of chapter. Chapter 4007. The god of the underworld's incarnation had already surpassed the divine king realm. Even Ji Tianxing could not see the depth of his power. As for the 5 god kings behind him, their strength was extremely deep as well. 1 peak god king and 4 ninth stage realm god kings. No matter which star region these few people were placed in, they were a powerful force. If the god of the underworld and the 5 divine kings had arrived when Ji Tianxing and the Sky Lion region lord were fighting, the Sky Lion region lord would definitely be rescued. Unfortunately, the god of the underworld and the 5 divine kings were too late. Fortunately, the Sky Lion region lord was unconscious and did not know. If he knew that he would be able to see a miracle if he delayed a little longer, waiting for the god of the underworld to return, he would definitely think of ways to delay the time. But there were no IFS in this world, only results. The god of the underworld stood proudly in the sky and looked at Ji Tianxing. He said indifferently, "Kenshin, after 1,000 years, we meet again." Ji Tianxing looked at him coldly and said, "You definitely did not expect that I would be reborn and appear in front of you again." The Netherworld Divine Emperor nodded slightly. Under the pitch-black ghostly mask, his pair of grey eyes revealed a hint of a smile. "Indeed, for the past 1,000 years, I had forgotten about you and did not expect you to be reborn. It's just that 100 years ago, my incarnation came to the lower realm and met a guy who looked very similar to you. Although this emperor had easily killed that guy, he was still able to do so. But from then on, I realized that something was wrong and guessed that you might have been reborn. Decades ago, you caused a storm of blood in the God realm and escaped to the Reincarnation Island. It was at that time that I received the news that you had been reborn. Since ancient times, who could reincarnate with their memories after their body and soul were destroyed? Only you did it. You are indeed the strongest divine king in the world." When he said this, the god of the underworld's tone was somewhat emotional. His praise for Ji Tianxing was also very sincere. But he changed the topic and sneered, "It's a pity that after your rebirth, you spent a few hundred years to recover to the peak of the divine king realm. But you found out that we were already the god of the underworld. Back then, the 5 of us had to join forces to kill you. But now, this emperor's incarnation can kill you 1,000 times over. You have been reborn, but you have to die again. Do you feel very desperate?" The Netherworld Divine Emperor looked as if victory was within his grasp. His eyes were filled with pity as he looked at Ji Tianxing. The 5 god kings behind him also revealed mocking sneers. In their eyes, the sword god who had once shaken the world was already a dead man. However, Ji Tianxing wasn't angry. Instead, he asked expressionlessly, "This prince was killed by you once. How can I repeat the same mistake and die again? Moreover, I am not the same as I was back then. I'm afraid your incarnation can't do anything to me." The god of the underworld was not in a hurry to make a move. Of course, he was not in a hurry either. While he was adjusting his divine power to the best state, he was also secretly observing the god of the underworld's incarnation. But all incarnations and clones had a common problem. They could not cultivate on their own and could not replenish their divine power. Once their power was exhausted, the incarnation and clones would collapse. In addition, the farther the incarnation and clones were from the main body, the less power they could unleash. When Ji Tianxing's incarnation fought side by side with him, they were extremely close and had half of the main body's strength. This was unparalleled in the world, one of a kind. Under normal circumstances, incarnations and clones only had 20% of the main body's strength. The further they were from the main body, the more their strength would weaken. For example, the dragon emperors of the dragon realm. Their main bodies were in outer space, and their incarnations and clones were in the dragon realm. They only had 10% of their strength. When the god of the underworld's incarnation descended, not only was it extremely far away, but it was also suppressed and weakened by the heavenly Tao. That incarnation only had 1% of the main body's strength. Therefore, Ji Tianxing judged that the god of the underworld's incarnation only had 10% of the main body's strength at most. Although he is a god emperor, and this incarnation has surpassed the divine king realm and has the aura of a god emperor, 10% of the main body's strength is 10%. However, This clone only had 10% of the original body's strength. Its true battle prowess was definitely not as strong as a real God Emperor. Its battle strength should be between a peak divine king and a God Emperor. After reaching this conclusion, Ji Tianxing felt more at ease and more confident. While Ji Tianxing was observing the god of the underworld was also observing him. Seeing that he was so confident, the god of the underworld's eyes flashed with surprise. He said calmly, "In terms of appearance and aura, you are no different from before. However, you are indeed stronger than before, and your foundation is deeper. Even so, you are only a peak divine king. You probably don't know how big the gap is between the divine king realm and the God Emperor realm. You have not taken the final step, but I have. I have transcended all living beings and stood above all world." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and sneered, "If your main body were here, such a long and confident speech would be somewhat convincing. But you are just an incarnation, not the real God Emperor. What is there to fear?" The god of the underworld was furious when he saw the contempt in his tone and expression. He stopped talking nonsense with Ji Tianxing. His eyes and aura turned cold as he growled, "Then I would like to see how much stronger you are compared to before. How dare you be so arrogant?" As soon as he finished speaking, the Netherworld God Emperor waved his hand and gave the order to attack. The peak divine kings and 4 9th-degree divine kings behind him had already taken out their divine weapons and were ready to attack. After receiving the god of the underworld's order, the 5 divine kings did not hesitate. They waved their weapons and used their various skills to besiege Ji Tianxing. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh swoosh! Dazzling divine light covered the sky. Violent divine power exploded and created a hurricane in the sky. Dozens of sharp blades of divine light slashed toward Ji Tianxing with a godly might that could destroy everything. The joint attack of 5 divine king powerhouses, the power was so powerful that even ordinary peak divine kings would have to retreat, unable to withstand it. However, Ji Tianxing's body was covered in a layer of golden light. He waved his sword and slashed out dozens of sword lights. He easily dispelled the attacks from all directions. He still stood at the same spot and did not move an inch. Seeing this, the god of the underworld frowned slightly. A cold light flashed in his eyes. As the God Emperor, he was above all living beings. His status was so noble that he naturally disdained to make the first move. He let the 5 divine kings attack first. Firstly, it was to show his status. Secondly, it was to test Ji Tianxing's background. The result of this test was out. Ji Tianxing's performance was beyond his expectations. He obviously had a strong foundation and was far stronger than ordinary peak divine kings. At least, the god of the underworld could conclude that the 5 divine kings under him were no match for Ji Tianxing. Chapter 4008. The god of the underworld had a rough understanding of Ji Tianxing's strength after just one exchange. However, he continued to watch the battle patiently. He also wanted to see if Ji Tianxing was able to hold on or if he had real skills. Kill. Die. Kenshin. Go to hell. The 5 divine kings were enraged by Ji Tianxing's reaction. They felt that Ji Tianxing was too arrogant. At the same time, they had embarrassed themselves in front of the God Emperor. The 5 of them roared angrily and unleashed their full strength. They once again used their divine skills and attacked Ji Tianxing from all directions. This time, they attacked in anger. They unleashed their divine powers recklessly and the divine skills they used were even stronger. Rumble. Swoosh. Swoosh. Swish. 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 In the divine light that covered the sky, there were not only divine lightning but also hundreds of sword shadows and flames that covered the sky. Even the ground within a 10,000-mile radius was covered by the divine light and was destroyed into ruins by the violent force. However, Ji Tianxing was fearless. He waved the burial of heaven indifferently and formed a sword net around him. Bam! 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 Boom! Crack! The divine skills that filled the sky crashed down and collided with the sword light. There was a deafening explosion that reverberated between heaven and earth. The divine skills of the 5 divine kings were once again blocked and neutralized by Ji Tianxing. He looked calm and seemed to be doing it effortlessly. He was also unharmed. The 5 divine kings seemed to have been greatly humiliated. They were all furious and their eyes were burning with anger and killing intent. All this time, they had been the trusted aides of the god of the underworld. They had a noble status and could do anything they wanted. Yet now, even with the 5 of them joining forces, they couldn't even harm a single hair on Ji Tianxing's head. However, the god of the underworld was watching with his own eyes. Didn't this prove that they were useless? Ah, you damned bastard, I'm going to tear you apart. So what if your defense is strong? Let's see how many moves you can last. The divine kings let out furious roars as they once again brandished their divine weapons and launched a 3rd round of attacks. This time, Ji Tianxing not only cast a spell to block their attacks, but also took advantage of the situation to launch a counterattack. Sky-breaking sword. Daylight sword. Dragon elephant divine fist. Ji Tianxing used the blurry golden light to protect himself as he waved the burial of heaven with all his might, slashing towards the 4 ninth stage realm god kings. Rumble. Peng peng peng. With a deafening boom, the attacks of the 5 god kings were destroyed. They turned into shards of divine light that scattered in the sky. Immediately after, Ji Tianxing's dragon elephant fist and daylight sword struck the 4 god kings. PFFF. The 2 god race god kings were sent flying by the dragon elephant fist. Blood spurted out from their 7 orifices as they were sent flying hundreds of miles away. The 2 foreign race god kings were more unlucky as they were swallowed by the daylight sword. Their bodies melted like snow and turned into a pool of blood. The 3rd round of attacks ended with the 2 foreign race god kings' bodies being destroyed while the other 2 god race god kings were severely injured. The remaining 2 foreign race god kings were shocked and furious as they fled back to the god of the underworld side. The 2 severely injured god race god kings suppressed their injuries and returned to the god of the underworld side, glaring at Ji Tianxing. The 2 of them were furious and wanted to curse Ji Tianxing. At this moment, the god of the underworld who had been watching the battle finally spoke. Not bad. Not bad at all. As the god of the underworld spoke, he couldn't help but clap and cheer. He stared deeply at Ji Tianxing and sneered, "No wonder you're so confident. Now it seems that you've improved a lot. But let me tell you, as long as you don't take the last step, it's useless and you're destined to die." As soon as he finished speaking, he personally made a move. Then, he slowly raised his palms and channeled a vast amount of god power. He slowly slapped towards Ji Tianxing. "My will is the will of the heavens. Under the heavenly axiom, all are ants." Heaven flipping palm. As the god of the underworld let out a low roar, 2 huge black and white palm shadows carrying the mysterious power of the heavenly axiom descended from the sky and slammed toward Ji Tianxing. Even though the speed of the 2 palm silhouettes was not fast, they were like 2 enormous mountains slowly descending from the sky. However, the pressure that these 2 palm shadows brought to Ji Tianxing was unprecedentedly great. In comparison, the pressure from the 5 god kings attacking him was less than 20% of the pressure from these 2 palm shadows. This was the first time Ji Tianxing faced an expert who could control the power of the heavenly axiom since his rebirth. Under the suppression of the 2 palm shadows, he could clearly feel how terrifying the power of the heavenly axiom was. The invisible power of the heavenly axiom pressed down like 2 enormous mountains that pressed down on his heart. It also felt like the heavens and earth were closing in and were about to crush him. That trace of power of the heavenly axiom exceeded the scope of divine power and made people feel reverence and fear from the bottom of their hearts. Fortunately, for some reason, Ji Tianxing did not resist or fear the power of the heavenly axiom. His expression was solemn as he resisted the terrifying pressure and waved the burial of heaven to slash out 2 huge swords that could split the heavens and earth. Boom! Crack! The 2 huge swords carried 5-colored divine light as they violently slashed at the 2 palm shadows. Following 2 deafening explosions, the sword lights collapsed on the spot and scattered into countless golden fragments. The 2 mountain-sized black and white palm shadows also collapsed and disintegrated in the turbulence. Of course, there was still an invisible suppressive force that slammed into Ji Tianxing. But Ji Tianxing's body flashed with golden light as he used the powerful defense of the indestructible golden body to neutralize the impact. He was unscathed and successfully blocked the attack of the god of the underworld. The god kings did not expect such an outcome, and it also stunned the god of the underworld. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. How is this possible? He actually blocked the attack of the god emperor? Is he really just a peak god king? The three god kings of the god race were stunned as they looked at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. They had thought that the god of the underworld would be able to easily kill Ji Tianxing. Even if he could not kill Ji Tianxing in one move, he would be able to severely injure him. But they did not expect the outcome to be like this. Just as the three of them were stunned, the god of the underworld shouted in a dignified tone, "What are you waiting for? Have you forgotten your mission?" Hearing the voice of the god of the underworld, the three god kings were awakened from their daze and fear appeared on their faces. They quickly brandished their divine weapons and charged in from three directions, joining forces with the god of the underworld to attack Ji Tianxing. At this moment, they did not care about bullying him with numbers. They only wanted to complete their mission. The god of the underworld's eyes were cold as he exuded a chilling aura. He cast a spell and summoned a 4-foot-long pitch-black divine sword. This sword was called the Sword of Death, and it was also a supreme-grade king-level divine weapon. The god of the underworld stared at Ji Tianxing and shouted angrily, "I did not expect you to have a supreme-grade divine weapon to protect yourself. I have miscalculated. In that case, I have no choice but to use my weapon to show you the power of the Sword of Death." Chapter 4009. The god of the underworld didn't want to use a weapon because of his status. He thought that even if Ji Tianxing was a bit stronger than the average peak divine king, he could still defeat him with his bare hands. But it turned out that Ji Tianxing was not only powerful, but also had a supreme-grade divine artifact. If he didn't use a weapon, he might not be able to kill Ji Tianxing. That would be too embarrassing. For his dignity, the god of the underworld had to use the Sword of Death. Heaven's will, destroy. The god of the underworld held a divine art with his left hand and waved the Sword of Death with his right hand. He slashed at Ji Tianxing slowly. He wasn't fast, but the Sword of Death released a dark blade aura with the cold energy of death. It fell from the sky and slashed at Ji Tianxing. This was the god of the underworld's second divine power, which also contained the power of the heavenly way. Ji Tianxing found something interesting. It was unknown whether the Netherworld Divine Emperor had deliberately slowed down his moves for the sake of solemnity, so as to appear neutral and peaceful, representing the will of the heavenly Tao. Or was it because the god of the underworld couldn't use the power of the heavenly way as freely as normal divine arts? In short, the Netherworld Divine Emperor performed two heavenly Tao secret arts. Both of them were done at a steady pace, as if the heavenly might had descended. Ji Tianxing had just waved the divine sword and stopped the attack of the three divine kings. When he saw the blade aura of death fall from the sky, he was immediately enveloped by the invisible power of the heavenly way and his body was a bit bent. The god of the underworld had used all his strength this time. The energy of death in the dark blade aura was also very strong and cold. Ji Tianxing used all the power of the indestructible golden body and straightened his back. He wanted to teleport away, but he found that the space around him was locked and he couldn't escape. The god of the underworld had also locked onto his soul. No matter how he ran, there was no way he could escape from this sword. With no other choice, Ji Tianxing could only wield the Burial of Heaven sword and unleash his ultimate skill with all his might to block the deathly sword light. Heavenly Dragon World Slash. He held the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and slashed out a huge golden sword with all his strength, slashing towards the pitch-black sword light from below. Boom! The gigantic dragon-shaped sword that was thousands of feet long collided with the pitch-black deathly sword light with a loud clang. However, the dragon-shaped sword collapsed on the spot, turning into fragments that scattered all over the sky. As for the pitch-black sword light of death, it was still intact, but its power had been weakened by 40%. Shua! The deathly sword light sped down and arrived above Ji Tianxing's head. Ji Tianxing was about to be sliced in half by the deathly sword light, and his godhead would be corroded by the deathly cold air and be severely injured. At this moment of life and death, Ji Tianxing knew that the Sword of Burial of Heaven couldn't stop the god of the underworld. After all, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was only a king-level superior-grade divine artifact. It could deal with a peak godly king, but it couldn't deal with the incarnation of the god of the underworld. Therefore, he decisively took out his divine hammer, infused it with violent divine power, and smashed it against the deathly sword light. Boom! Dazzling 5-colored lightning burst forth from the divine hammer, exploding with a power that could destroy everything as it violently smashed into the deathly sword light. With a deafening shattering sound, the pitch-black sword light was finally smashed into pieces and dissipated on the spot. The divine hammer also buzzed from the impact, and the 5-colored lightning kept flashing. The destructive shockwave carried countless shards of divine light as it spread out in all directions. The 3 godly kings of the god race were sent flying by the terrifying shockwave, and blood spurted out of their mouths and noses. Ji Tianxing was also sent flying hundreds of miles, and he took the opportunity to get away from the god of the underworld. The space within thousands of miles was also shattered by the shockwave, revealing a large patch of pitch-black void. The second move of the god of the underworld was once again neutralized by Ji Tianxing, and Ji Tianxing was unscathed. This made the god of the underworld frown, and his eyes flashed with a cold light, revealing a shocked expression. You actually have a second supreme-grade divine artifact. As a god-emperor, he obviously knew how rare a king-level supreme-grade divine artifact was. It was an extravagant hope for an ordinary peak godly king to obtain one. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, actually had 2 supreme-grade divine artifacts. In this way, he could be said to be invincible under the god-emperor realm. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to adjust his breathing, and he looked at the god of the underworld with a cold smile. I already knew that you would come. Since I dared to meet and fight you, how could I not be confident? You, very good. The god of the underworld frowned again, and his eyes became even colder. Supreme-grade divine artifacts are indeed powerful, but I am already a godly king. No matter how many supreme-grade divine artifacts you have, it is useless. The god of the underworld roared, and he swung the sword of death again, striking out 6 consecutive sword radiances. 6 paths of reincarnation. The 6 sword radiances were as black as ink, and they were thousands of feet long, and they contained a bone-chilling aura of death. The sword radiances were arranged in a special way, and they contained the power of the heavenly way of reincarnation. They fell from the sky and pierced toward Ji Tianxing. Enveloped by the sword light, with Ji Tianxing as the center, the space within a 100-mile radius shattered inch by inch. After the space was shattered, a pitch-black void appeared. It was as if endless darkness was surging toward Ji Tianxing, trying to swallow him whole. He was in the darkness, and there was no way for him to escape. However, he did not panic. First, he swung the divine hammer, striking out dozens of lightning pillars to block the attacks of the 3 godly kings. Then, he swung the divine hammer, striking out hundreds of light blades with all his might. He released 300 divine Tao laws to block the 6 paths of reincarnation. Kaboom! Bam! 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 After the earth-shattering collisions, there were continuous explosions. After the hundreds of powerful light blades hit the 6 paths of reincarnation, they all collapsed, and countless fragments of divine light exploded. Although all the light blades had collapsed, the 6 pitch-black sword radiances had not dissipated. However, the power of the sword radiances had been reduced by half, and their speed was also greatly reduced. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing held the divine hammer with both hands and used it as a divine sword, using a supreme skill. Sword of Annihilation. As he roared, he drew on the boundless power of the world and swung the divine hammer, striking out a brilliant golden sword that was tens of thousands of feet long. The giant sword that could split heaven and earth apart and destroy everything contained the power of the world and 300 divine Tao laws. It struck the 6 paths of reincarnation with a loud boom. With a loud boom, the 6 paths of reincarnation sword was destroyed. Although the tens of thousands of feet long sword of annihilation did not collapse, its power and speed were reduced by more than half. It continued to strike toward the god of the underworld. Seeing the sword radiances coming toward him, the god of the underworld raised his eyebrows, and a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. This is the power of the world. Kenshin, you have refined an entire world and can use the power of the world. The god of the underworld looked at Ji Tianxing in surprise, and his voice was filled with disbelief. As a god-emperor, He naturally knew how powerful the power of the world was. If his 6 paths of reincarnation represented death, then the power of the world represented new life. These two powers had different attributes and meanings, but they were the same level of power of the heavenly Tao. These were powers that ordinary godly kings could not control. Chapter 40:10. After a few exchanges, the god of the underworld saw Ji Tianxing in a different light. Even though the divine Tao laws that Ji Tianxing executed were unable to pose a threat to him. But the power of the world was strong enough to break through his defense. This made the god of the underworld even more cautious. After the 6 paths of reincarnation sword was destroyed, Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to escape from the boundless darkness. He retreated 20,000 miles into the sky and waved his hammer again, attacking the 3 god kings with all his might. The 3 god race god kings were intimidated by the terrifying power and retreated one after another. But they were too slow and were immediately enveloped by a few light blades. They were about to be killed on the spot. At this moment, the god of the underworld roared and teleported. Kenshin, don't be so arrogant. The god of the underworld appeared in front of the 3 god kings in a flash. He clapped his left hand and a black wind appeared. It carried the power of the heavenly Tao and shattered a few light blades. He waved the sword of death in his right hand and slashed out 2 pitch-black sword lights that were 10,000 feet long. They slashed at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was forced to retreat. He waved his hammer with all his might to block the giant sword. Kaboom! With a loud bang, the giant sword shattered Ji Tianxing's attack and sent him flying 1,000 miles away. The 3 god kings were also out of danger. They quickly ran behind the god of the underworld. Seeing this, the god of the underworld's eyes darkened. He said in a low voice, "Kenshin's strength is extraordinary. You can't deal with him. Yang Ju, stay. The rest of you, return to the ship to heal." The Yang Ju he was talking about was the peak god king. He was the god of the underworld's confidant. 1,200 years ago, when he was still a 7th-level god king, he was taken in as a disciple by the god of the underworld. Hearing the god of the underworld's order, the 2 injured god kings and the 2 alien god kings' godheads entered the god of the underworld's ship. After entering the divine ship, they all heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Indeed, with their strength of 9th-level god kings, they were not a threat to Ji Tianxing. They were in great danger. When Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld fought, the aftershocks of the battle could injure them. Other than the peak god king Yang Ju, they were not qualified to participate in this battle. In the god of the underworld's avatar was Yang Ju of the underworld's avatar. The battle just now had destroyed everything within a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The mountains and forests were all in ruins. Even the sky within tens of thousands of miles had become fragmented and filled with pitch-black void. The god of the underworld's eyes darkened. He swung his sword at Ji Tianxing again. Yang Ju did not dare to show any fear or worry. He charged at Ji Tianxing without any regard for his own safety. He used all kinds of skills and techniques. Ji Tianxing fought and retreated at the same time. He did not show any weakness. After exchanging another 10 moves with the god of the underworld, he was completely relieved. Reality proved that his previous deduction was correct. The god of the underworld's avatar was stronger than a god king, but he was not a true god emperor. At least, he was a threat to him, but he did not have an overwhelming advantage. As long as he was careful, he would not be in danger. Rumble. Bam bam bam. The 3 experts were still fighting high up in the sky, and the battlefield spanned tens of thousands of miles. Everywhere it passed, the sky would shatter and be occupied by boundless darkness. A void storm would rise. The ground and mountains were also in ruins. The ground was full of ditches and pits. Smoke and dust rose everywhere. A deafening sound reverberated between heaven and earth. The intense and dazzling light of the divine techniques alerted the mutated tribe powerhouses hundreds of thousands of miles away. Many mutated tribe guards approached carefully and watched the battle from afar. The capture of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the death of all the God Kings had scared the hell out of these guards. However, when they saw Ji Tianxing being attacked by the god of the underworld and Yang Ju, they all smiled excitedly. Many people cheered and shouted in surprise. They were not stupid. They immediately guessed the identity of the god of the underworld and Yang Ju. Everyone, look! The Lord Supreme is here. Ha ha ha! This is great. The Lord Supreme is here to save us. We are saved. That bastard is about to be killed by the Lord Supreme. Many of the guards roared with joy as they passed on the good news to the others. Soon, most of the guards heard the news. The crowd was in a state of joy and excitement. As time passed, the battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld became more and more intense. The three of them moved hundreds of thousands of miles away from the battlefield. They were getting closer and closer to the ruins of the Divine Radiance Grotto Heaven. At the same time, Ji Tianxing and Yang Ju were both severely injured. Only the god of the underworld was unharmed. In comparison, Yang Ju's injuries were more miserable and serious, while Ji Tianxing's injuries were lighter and not serious. When the god of the underworld swung his sword at Ji Tianxing again, Ji Tianxing saw Yang Ju's weakness. Therefore, he used the protection of the indestructible golden body to resist the sword light of the god of the underworld and attacked Yang Ju with all his might. Sword of Destruction. In order to hit Yang Ju, Ji Tianxing used the power of the world again and attacked Yang Ju fiercely. When Yang Ju felt the terrifying power of the world and saw the sword light coming, he instinctively wanted to retreat. Unfortunately, the space around him was sealed. His speed of escape was extremely slow. Before he could retreat more than 10,000 feet, the sword light drowned his body. Bang! Kaboom! The first loud sound was from Yang Ju being hit by the sword of destruction. His body exploded on the spot and blood splattered everywhere. Then, Ji Tianxing was also hit by the god of the underworld's deadly sword light. He rolled and flew backward. Bang! Ji Tianxing was sent flying backward for 300 miles, smashing into the ground that seemed to be in ruins. Dust and smoke rose into the air. When he crawled out of the ruins, his hair was messy and his body was covered in blood. Blood was also dripping from his mouth and nose. Even the hazy golden light that enveloped his body had become much dimmer. However, he was not fatally injured. After using his power to suppress his injuries, he could continue fighting. On the other hand, Yang Ju was in a much worse state. His divine body was destroyed by the sword of destruction and turned into a pile of flesh and blood. He only had one intact godhead left. He did not dare to fight anymore. He could only escape back to the god of the underworld's divine ship. Ever since Yang Ju became a peak divine king, this was the first time he had suffered such a great loss. Even when he entered the divine ship, he still could not believe that his divine body was destroyed by Kenshin. As everyone knew, a divine king's body would need at least 100 years to recover. Even with the help of the god of the underworld, it would still take him 50 to 60 years. This result made Yang Ju frustrated and depressed. He thought to himself, damn it, how could his strength be so strong? Now, not only do I have to go into seclusion to heal, but I have also embarrassed myself in front of Master. Yang Ju was not the only one who was shocked. The god of the underworld was too. He did not expect Ji Tianxing to be so daring. He dared to take his attack head-on and was not injured. He even destroyed Yang Ju's body. Now, the god of the underworld was fighting alone. He did not know if he could defeat Ji Tianxing. Chapter 40:11. Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld exchanged dozens of blows. The two of them shattered the world within tens of thousands of miles, but it was still difficult to determine a winner. Neither of them could injure the other. Of course, both of them were using up a lot of their divine power, and their strength was slowly declining. Ji Tianxing was fine. He could take divine pills to quickly replenish his divine power. The god of the underworld's avatar was a little embarrassed. He couldn't recover his divine power through cultivation or taking divine pills. His avatar was equivalent to a container that stored a lot of divine power. He could only use his divine power and not recharge it. At most, he could fight Ji Tianxing for a day before his divine power was exhausted. At that time, his divine power would be exhausted and unable to recover. He could only collapse. Therefore, the god of the underworld only wanted to end the battle quickly and kill Ji Tianxing as soon as possible. However, Ji Tianxing had the protection of a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact and rich combat experience. The two of them exchanged nearly 100 blows and shattered the world within tens of thousands of miles, but it was still difficult to determine a winner. Not to mention killing Ji Tianxing, the god of the underworld couldn't even injure Ji Tianxing. The only change was that the two of them were using up more energy and their strength was declining. The battlefield was moving closer and closer to the ruins of the divine palace. They were only about 30,000 miles away. Around the ruins, the tens of thousands of foreign race experts who were cheering finally began to panic. They clearly saw that several experts had besieged Ji Tianxing at the beginning. In the end, only a black-robed expert was left fighting Ji Tianxing. And judging from the situation, neither of them had the upper hand. It seemed that they were evenly matched. What made the crowd even more frightened and anxious was that the aftermath of the battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld was too terrifying. With the two of them as the center, a radius of 50,000 miles was enveloped by divine light. The shockwaves rippled out. The world was collapsing and shattering, occupied by the pitch-black void. The destructive shockwave flattened all the mountains and rivers, turning them into scorched earth and ruins. The tens of thousands of non-human experts were completely unable to withstand the onslaught of the shockwave. Many unlucky fellows were heavily wounded by the blast waves when they were still more than 40,000 miles away from the battlefield. Blood was spurting out of their orifices. When the others saw this, how could they dare to stay? When Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld kept moving the battlefield closer and closer to the ruins of the divine palace, tens of thousands of powerful non-humankind beings hurriedly retreated deeper into the cave. These people's minds were somewhat conflicted, causing them to be hesitant in their actions. Not only did they have to avoid the shockwave, but they also wanted to see the result of the battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld. As such, they all retreated a certain distance. After they were temporarily safe, they stopped in the sky to watch the battle. When Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld got closer, the shockwaves came and they continued to retreat into the depths of the grotto heaven. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. The god of the underworld attacked Ji Tianxing fiercely like a storm, but to no avail. He had expended 30% of his strength, and his strength was beginning to weaken. However, Ji Tianxing was only slightly injured, which did not affect his battle. Although Ji Tianxing had also expended 30% of his divine power, he was slowly recovering with the help of the king-grade divine pills. At this point, the god of the underworld had no choice but to slow down the pace of his attacks and start to think about how to deal with Ji Tianxing. This damned guy is indeed stronger than before. And not just a little stronger, but almost twice as strong. I don't know what kind of opportunity he had, but he actually has 3 king-grade divine artifacts. A protective treasure, a divine cauldron, and a divine hammer. With just this incarnation of mine and the sword of death, I really can't do anything to him. The god of the underworld pondered silently as he dealt with Ji Tianxing. His eyes were very dark, and he was very irritated. His entire body was filled with burning murderous intent. Logically speaking, my incarnation can also use the power of the heavenly Tao. The power of the heavenly Tao has a natural suppressive effect on all living beings below the level of God Emperor, just like the punishment of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, I should have the upper hand and suppress him in all aspects. However, the power of the heavenly Tao has no effect on him, nor does it have any obvious suppressive effect. What's going on? He's only a peak divine king, and he hasn't mastered the power of the heavenly Tao, and he hasn't even broken through to the level of God Emperor. This shouldn't be happening. The god of the underworld frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly, he thought of something and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Could it be the executioner painting? The executioner painting is not lost, but in his hands. It's because of the executioner painting's protection that he is immune to the suppression of the heavenly Tao? Yes, that should be the reason. Back then, the 5 god emperors besieged Kenshin to steal the executioner painting. They obtained the eternal heavenly book, which allowed them to see through the mysteries of the heavens and cultivate the power of the heavenly Tao beyond the level of divine kings. However, the eternal heavenly book and the executioner painting were one and the same. Both were the upper and lower parts, and they needed to be cultivated together to reach the end. As for what the end was, the 5 god emperors didn't know. They only cultivated the first half of the eternal heavenly book and became god emperors. They were above the rest of life and could replace Tianqing. This made them speculate that if they cultivated the executioner painting to perfection, they might be able to replace the heavenly Tao, or even become the heavenly Tao. Because of this, the 5 god emperors didn't give up on searching for the executioner painting after Kenshin fell. In the past, they always thought that Kenshin had fallen, and the executioner painting must have been lost in the world. Perhaps it was in the heavenly realm, or in the lower realm, but it was more likely that it was in the void. It was also for this reason that the 5 god emperors left the heavenly realm and went to the void. As for the mystery of the grey fog, it was a surprise they found while exploring the void in search of the executioner painting. The god of the underworld was the most shrewd and scheming. When the 5 god emperors couldn't find the whereabouts of the executioner painting after searching the void, he turned his attention to the lower realm. He was limited by the rules of the heavenly Tao and couldn't go down to the lower realm to search for it himself. However, he used the power of the god emperor to interfere with the rules of the heavenly Tao and secretly support the heaven punishers in the lower realm. He wanted to cultivate the heaven punishers to have the power to sweep through the 3,000 realms and help him search the lower realm for the executioner painting. However, his scheme was about to succeed, but Ji Tianqing ruined it. Now, the god of the underworld saw Ji Tianqing with his own eyes and knew that he was Kenshin's reincarnation. Now that the truth was out, the god of the underworld had enough reason to suspect that the executioner painting was still in Ji Tianqing's hand. At this time, the god of the underworld exchanged another blow with Ji Tianqing. In the earth-shattering explosion, both of them were pushed back by the violent force. The god of the underworld suddenly shouted, "Kenshin, you have mastered the executioner painting?" "What?" Ji Tianqing had just retreated 100 miles away and was focused on thinking about how to deal with the god of the underworld's attack. Suddenly hearing this strange sentence, he couldn't help but be stunned. The god of the underworld stared at his reaction and asked without hesitation, "If you didn't master the executioner painting, how could you resist the power of the heavenly Tao and be on par with my clone?" Chapter 40:12. This time, Ji Tianqing understood. He frowned, his pupils constricted, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He knew that the god of the underworld was beginning to suspect that he had the heaven-vanquishing formation. The 2 questions just now were merely probing questions from the god of the underworld. Of course, this was to be expected, and Ji Tianqing was not surprised. The blood feud between him and the 5 god emperors was because of the eternal heavenly book and the heaven-vanquishing formation. The existence of these 2 treasures was no secret to the 6 of them. However, a normal person would think that the heaven-vanquishing formation would be lost in the world after Kenshin's death. Now that Kenshin had been reborn, he would definitely be searching for the heaven-vanquishing formation. However, Ji Tianqing knew that in the past 1,000 years, the 5 god emperors had searched the god world and the outer realms for the formation. The god of the underworld had even supported the heaven punisher tribe to search for the heaven-vanquishing formation in the lower realms. The 5 god emperors had found nothing. They had not found the heaven-vanquishing formation. He, the Kenshin who had died 1,000 years ago, had been reborn. It was only natural that the god of the underworld would suspect that he had the heaven-vanquishing formation. In just 2 short breaths, Ji Tianqing had sorted out his thoughts. He sneered in his heart, "The god of the underworld is indeed scheming. He even covets the heaven-vanquishing formation." Not only did he support the heaven punisher tribe to search for the heaven-vanquishing formation in the lower realms, he even personally probed me when he met me. "Ha ha ha, you're right. The heaven-vanquishing formation is indeed in my hands. I've also cultivated it for many years." Although the god of the underworld had inadvertently guessed the truth, how could Ji Tianqing admit to it? He looked at the god of the underworld with a shocked expression and roared in disbelief, "The heaven-vanquishing formation? Didn't you take it away?" The meaning of this reaction was clear. Back then, you all joined forces to kill me in order to steal the heaven punishment formation. After my death, the heaven punishment formation must have been taken away by you all. How could you ask such a question? Don't tell me you didn't get the heaven punishment array? The god of the underworld was also startled. He suddenly realized that he had revealed a secret. He was quite upset and thought to himself, looking at Kenshin's reaction, the heaven punishment formation is not in his hands. Did he always think that we had the heaven punishment formation? As expected, Ji Tianxing's expression was complicated. He was in pain and excitement at the same time. He growled, "You 5 bastards, you have all surpassed the Deity King realm and reached the God Emperor realm. I thought it was because you obtained the eternal heavenly scripture and the heaven vanquishing formation. From the looks of it, you only have the eternal heavenly scripture. Even if you kill me, you won't be able to get the heaven punishment array, ha 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 ha." At the end of his speech, Ji Tianxing looked up to the sky and laughed heartily. It was obvious that he was gloating over their misfortune. The god of the underworld furrowed his brows. His expression and eyes became even more sinister. He thought that Kenshin did not have the heaven punishment formation, but he had always thought that the heaven punishment formation was in their hands. And now, this secret had been exposed by his probing. He was even more upset and regretful. He began to worry. Since Kenshin knew that the heaven punishment formation was not in their hands, he would definitely go and look for it. If Kenshin was lucky enough to find the heaven punishment formation, the consequences would be unimaginable. Thinking of this, the god of the underworld quickly changed his words and tried to salvage the situation. "Kenshin, I was just bluffing you, but you believed me. Ha ha ha. Since we joined forces to kill you, how could we not get the heaven punishment formation? Without the heavenly scripture and the heaven punishment formation, how could the 5 of us have broken through to the God Emperor realm?" Hearing this, Ji Tianxing's expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with anger. The god of the underworld secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He sneered and said, "How is it? You must be very angry and disappointed, right? Just when you saw the hope of revenge, it was destroyed. This feeling must be very painful and very hopeless, right?" Ji Tianxing's face was filled with anger. He cursed angrily, "You Ming, you despicable B****, what are you trying to do?" The god of the underworld laughed heartily, "Ha ha ha. I wanted to mess with your mentality. I wanted to give you a glimmer of hope, and then I wanted to make you despair. You will never be able to win against me, B****, go to hell." Ji Tianxing was indeed enraged. He waved his heavenly hammer and used his ultimate technique to attack the god of the underworld. Seeing this, the god of the underworld was finally sure that Ji Tianxing had believed his words. The heavy burden in his heart was lifted. He hurriedly waved the sword of death and used his heavenly energy to block Ji Tianxing's attack. Kaboom! Boom! Boom! The 2 of them used their ultimate techniques and clashed fiercely in the sky, creating a deafening explosion. The sky within a radius of 10,000 miles was shattered by the violent power and was quickly filled with pitch-black void. The 2 of them fought with all their might and moved deeper into the grotto heaven. Before they knew it, another 2 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld moved another 100,000 miles and reached the deepest part of the grotto heaven. At this time, the tens of thousands of non-human tribe elites had already scattered and fled in all directions. They no longer dared to watch the battle or stay near the battlefield. They all fled in all directions. Half of the divine radiance grotto heaven had been destroyed by Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld. It was completely eroded by the void. A void storm swept through the remaining grotto heaven, making it extremely dangerous. The tens of thousands of non-human tribe elites had nowhere to hide. They could only escape toward the exit of the divine radiance grotto heaven. At this time, Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld only had 50% of their strength left. Both of them looked a little haggard. Ji Tianxing's hair was disheveled, and there were dozens of wounds all over his body. His white robe had long been dyed gold by the god's blood. He was exhausted, and his face was pale. He looked like he was panting. While the 2 sides stopped fighting, he hurriedly took out a king-level divine pill and consumed it to quickly recover his divine power. The mask on the face of the god of the underworld's incarnation had also been shattered. It had fallen into some ruins. However, after the mask fell, his face could not be seen. This was because this incarnation of his had no face. The face under the mask was a ball of pitch-black death energy. The black robe he wore had also become tattered, and it fluttered in the wind. The aura of the sword of death in his hand had also weakened. The two sides stood in the shattered sky, facing each other from hundreds of miles away. Ji Tianxing was still full of killing intent, and his eyes were resolute. However, the god of the underworld had already made up his mind to end this inconclusive battle. Kenshin, I have to admit that I have indeed underestimated you. If I had known that you would bring me such a surprise, I would not have only sent an incarnation. Today's battle ends here. When my true body arrives, you will definitely die. After saying these words, the god of the underworld passed through the spatial rift, entered the void, and left the divine radiance grotto heaven. Obviously, he did not want to continue fighting, lest this incarnation of his be destroyed here. End of chapter. Chapter 40:13. To a divine king powerhouse, refining a clone or incarnation was absolutely not some easy matter. Not only did it require a portion of one's own effort and a wisp of one's soul, but it also required decades or centuries of time. The god of the underworld's main body had been busy researching the mystery of the grey fog and had no time to deal with government affairs. Most of the time, he relied on his two avatars to deal with all sorts of matters. He had spent more than 100 years to create these two avatars. After all, the avatars could also use the power of the heavenly Tao. This was very heaven-defying and unbelievable. The two avatars of the god of the underworld had made many contributions over the past 1,000 years and had completed almost all of his missions. They were already inseparable from him. If this avatar continued to fight with Ji Tianxing, it would exhaust its energy in a few hours and be destroyed on the spot. That would be a huge loss to the god of the underworld, and it would take decades to make up for it. But now, the five god emperors' plan to research the mystery of the grey fog was at the most critical moment. How could they waste time? Swoosh! With a flash of light, the god of the underworld entered the void and sped toward the depths of the starry sky. Ji Tianxing gave chase without hesitation and left the divine radiance grotto heaven. The god of the underworld had made the decisive choice to retreat in time to protect this avatar. But Ji Tianxing would not let this avatar escape. He was determined to destroy this avatar. Even though his current strength was not enough to threaten the god of the underworld's main body. But he was still very willing to destroy one of the god of the underworld's avatars and teach the god of the underworld a lesson. After the two of them left, the divine radiance grotto heaven regained its peace. The divine light that covered the sky gradually dissipated, and the deafening sound that reverberated between heaven and earth also slowly died down. In the distance, the tens of thousands of Xenorace experts who had yet to recover from their shock and were fleeing in panic finally revealed expressions of relief as if they had just survived a calamity. They're finally gone. Yes. They're finally gone. We're safe. Is that mysterious black-robed man Lord Supreme? Why do I feel that something is wrong? Lord Supreme actually didn't kill that guy and even escaped into the void. That white-robed young man is a peak divine king. Didn't Lord Supreme surpass the divine king realm? Shouldn't he have easily killed the white-robed young man? This is too strange. Could it be that the domain leader lied to us? Actually, Lord Supreme is also a peak divine king? Yeah. This is the only explanation. Otherwise, how could Lord Supreme not be able to defeat that fellow? Do you think the two of them will return after escaping into the void? I don't know if they will come back. I just want to know who will win. I hope Lord Supreme Being can kill that white-robed young man. Even if he can't, he should at least severely injure him. Otherwise, we'll be doomed. Yeah. If Lord Supreme is defeated and the white-robed young man returns, I'm afraid he'll kill us all. Then what are you waiting for? Take this opportunity to escape. The foreign race experts scattered in all directions were discussing the battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld. They expressed similar emotions and doubts. No one knew who would win or lose this battle. Of course, no one could enter the void to check the outcome. The god of the underworld sped through the void like a meteor streaking across the starry sky. His speed was extremely fast. In every breath, he could cross tens of thousands of miles. If he was traveling normally, he would not waste his divine power so extravagantly. He would definitely take out his divine warship. That was a top-grade king-grade divine warship. Its speed was unbelievably fast. A peak divine king would take 7 to 8 years to travel, but his divine warship would only take 3 months to arrive. After all, a top-grade king-grade divine warship could perform space jumps between stars and cross hundreds of millions of miles at a time. It was also because of this that he only took 3 months to leave the grey fog and arrive at the heavenly lion star. But now, Ji Tianxing was tens of thousands of miles behind him, chasing relentlessly. If he took out his divine warship, he would probably be caught by Ji Tianxing as soon as he entered the divine warship. To be safe, he had to shake off Ji Tianxing first before using his divine warship to travel. Unfortunately, the god of the underworld's idea was good, but reality was not as he wished. Ji Tianxing flew through the void. He felt like a fish in water, like a dragon riding the wind. Ordinary peak divine kings could only fly in the void. They could fly 20 to 30,000 miles in every breath. When he flew in the void, he could travel 60 to 70,000 miles in every breath. Most importantly, he could break the rules of the heavenly Tao and teleport in the void. Only a top-grade king-grade divine warship that contained the power of the heavenly Tao could perform space jumps in the void. Other divine artifacts or godly king experts were unable to teleport. In order to chase after the god of the underworld, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate to expend his divine power and teleport continuously in the void. In a short while, he actually caught up with the god of the underworld. Swoosh! In a flash, Ji Tianxing teleported in front of the god of the underworld and blocked his path. Damn it! The god of the underworld's expression changed immediately. His eyes shone with a cold light as he cursed in a low voice. He did not stop. Instead, he sped up and rushed to the left. He did not want to waste time and wanted to speed around Ji Tianxing. Just now, he did not use teleportation to conserve his divine power. Now, in order to shake off Ji Tianxing, he could not care less. Swish! In a flash, the god of the underworld teleported 20,000 miles and went around Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing reacted quickly. He seemed to have expected the god of the underworld to teleport away. He also teleported 20,000 miles and appeared behind him. This time, before the god of the underworld could teleport away again, Ji Tianxing took out the primordial chaos bell and suppressed it. Hum! The primordial chaos bell instantly expanded hundreds of millions of times and turned into a giant bell bigger than a mountain, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. The area within 10,000 miles was sealed. Even if the god of the underworld used the power of the heavenly path to teleport, it was neutralized by the power of the primordial chaos bell. He had failed to teleport and was trapped in the primordial chaos bell. If he wanted to escape the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, he had to break the bell wall. Netherworld, since you're here, stay. Ji Tianxing also appeared in the primordial chaos bell. He held the divine hammer in his hand and rushed toward the god of the underworld with murderous intent. This was what the god of the underworld said to him when he appeared. Now, he returned this sentence to the god of the underworld. The god of the underworld was greatly provoked. It was as if he had been slapped by Ji Tianxing. He was ashamed and angry. Although he was wise and decisive, he was not someone who would submit to humiliation. He valued his reputation and dignity more than anyone else. Since Ji Tianxing was pestering him and was unwilling to give up, he also made up his mind to fight to the death with Ji Tianxing. Kenshin, I admit that you are stronger than before. You do have some ability. However, if you and I continue to fight, it will only be a waste of time. No one can defeat the other. Since you are so aggressive and pestering me, don't blame me for not being polite. Today, I will destroy you even if I have to destroy this incarnation. Chapter 40:14. The god of the underworld decided to stop running and fight to the death with Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing could not have asked for more. He sneered at him. Don't speak so righteously, as if you're not running anymore and want to fight to the death with me. In fact, you've already been trapped by my divine bell. There's no way you can escape. As he spoke, Ji Tianxing activated the primordial chaos bell with all his might, releasing a terrifying power to suppress the god of the underworld. Even though the god of the underworld could borrow the power of the heavenly Tao, it was offset by the divine bell's heavenly Tao power. Under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, he was not like an ordinary divine king, whose movements were slow and his strength was greatly weakened. However, his movements were indeed restricted. There was a great resistance, and his combat strength was also weakened by about 20%. Seeing Ji Tianxing charging over with his divine hammer, the god of the underworld shouted angrily, arrogant and ignorant, "I just don't want to damage this incarnation. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Exchanging your life with this incarnation is not a loss for me." As he shouted angrily, the god of the underworld waved the sword of death and launched a counterattack against Ji Tianxing. Both of them unleashed their full strength and used their ultimate killing moves, starting to fight again. Bam! Boom! 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 The battle that had just stopped for a short while erupted again. The difference was that the battle in the divine splendor grotto heaven would shatter heaven and earth, turning half of the grotto heaven into a void. But this time, the battle was in the void, under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell. No matter how intense the battle was, it would not affect others. At most, it would only break the primordial chaos bell. Although the god of the underworld had the sword of death, he had the qualifications and possibility to do so. However, Ji Tianxing was not worried. He was confident that he could suppress the god of the underworld. Soon, the two of them had exchanged 10 moves. A deafening sound reverberated within the god bell. After the collision of the divine arts, countless fragments of divine light scattered in all directions. The incomparably violent impact wrapped around the fragments of divine light and formed a destructive shockwave that spread out in all directions. However, the shockwave was blocked by the bell wall and could not spread out. The primordial chaos bell was under great pressure, constantly trembling and emitting bursts of buzzing sounds. Finally, the power of the god of the underworld began to decline rapidly. Ji Tianxing seized the opportunity and used his trump card. Sword of Destruction. He roared angrily as he absorbed a huge amount of world power. He held the sword with both hands and slashed out a giant golden sword that was thousands of feet long. The enormous sword was formed from the energy of the world, and it even carried over 300 types of divine Tao laws, causing its might to be unprecedentedly formidable. After all, the 5 elements world had grown several times stronger under Ji Tianxing's nurturing. As a result, Ji Tianxing's World Destroyer sword was even more powerful than before. The god of the underworld's pupils constricted when he saw the golden great sword slashing toward him. A hint of surprise flashed across his eyes. Damn it! It's the energy of the world again. It's actually comparable to the energy of the heavenly Tao. Previously, he suspected that Ji Tianxing had the heaven-vanquishing formation and cultivated it, mastering the energy of the heavenly Tao. However, after probing, he discovered that this was not the case. Then, when he fought with Ji Tianxing used a brand new power. When he recognized that it was the energy of the world, he was very surprised and shocked that Ji Tianxing controlled a certain world. Now, Ji Tianxing's World Destroyer sword had some changes. The energy of the world was obviously stronger than before and was comparable to the energy of the heavenly Tao. Only then did the god of the underworld understand that Ji Tianxing had not used his full strength when fighting with him previously. At this moment, Ji Tianxing was finally going all out. The World Destroyer sword came too quickly, and the god of the underworld did not have time to think. He could only wave the sword of death and block with all his might. Kaboom! The god of the underworld slashed out a few pitch-black sword of death, which collided with the giant golden sword. There was an earth-shattering sound. The pitch-black sword of death collapsed, but the World Destroyer sword was still intact. It was just that its speed and power had decreased by half. Bang! The giant golden sword slashed the god of the underworld, tearing his black robe into pieces. His entire body flew backward and smashed into the bell wall thousands of miles away. Fortunately, this was only the incarnation of the god of the underworld, not a body of flesh and blood. Even though there was a huge wound on his chest, no divine blood flowed out. A pitch-black aura of death quickly covered his body and wounds, making him look even more sinister. However, the god of the underworld was severely injured, and his power weakened even further. He used his divine power to suppress his injuries. Holding the sword of death, he glared at Ji Tianxing and shouted coldly, "Kenshin, I didn't expect you to become so insidious and cunning. Previously, when you fought with me for so long, you pretended to use all your strength, but in fact, you were still holding back. Only now did you reveal your true strength." In the god of the underworld's impression, Kenshin was cold, aloof, and arrogant. He was also quite confident and domineering, and rarely played tricks. However, after reincarnating, Kenshin's temperament and style had obviously changed. This was not good news for the god of the underworld. He would rather Kenshin be the same as before. Only then would he have a chance to use some tricks and kill Kenshin again. If the god of swords became shrewd and scheming, he would also start to play tricks, then it would be much more troublesome for him to kill Kenshin a second time. Hearing the god of the underworld's cold shout, Ji Tianxing approached with his hammer and sneered, "When it comes to being insidious and cunning, you 5 bastards are even more despicable. As for now, do you think I've used all my strength and brought out my true strength?" Hearing this, the god of the underworld was stunned for a moment, and his gaze deepened. Before this, he was confident that his strength surpassed the God King realm and could easily see through Ji Tianxing. But now, he realized that he could not see through Ji Tianxing. After all, he could not be sure if the combat strength Ji Tianxing had just displayed was his full strength. Perhaps Ji Tianxing was still holding back. While the god of the underworld was thinking, Ji Tianxing once again swung his hammer and used his ultimate skill, launching a fierce attack on the god of the underworld. Sword breaking 9 heavens. The god of the underworld could only restrain his thoughts and focus on fighting with all his strength. Boom, boom, boom. The two of them fought fiercely in the void, their figures flashing back and forth, constantly erupting with dazzling divine light and earth-shattering explosions. After 10 moves, the god of the underworld had another wound on his body, and his strength weakened even further. After 20 moves, Ji Tianxing was also injured by the god of the underworld, and his injuries worsened. Time quietly passed. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. After 8 hours, the two of them had exchanged tens of thousands of moves, and their divine powers were almost completely exhausted. At this point, the battle finally came to an end. Just as the god of the underworld and Ji Tianxing had predicted, the god of the underworld's avatar was slashed into pieces by Ji Tianxing after its strength was exhausted, and it dissipated into the void. Chapter 40:15. This result was very much in line with Ji Tianxing's expectations. But to the god of the underworld, it was half the case. From the moment he was suppressed by the primordial chaos bell and decided to fight to the death with Ji Tianxing, he had expected that this incarnation would be destroyed. But he had thought that by sacrificing this incarnation, he would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianxing. At the very least, he would be able to severely injure Ji Tianxing and make Ji Tianxing go into seclusion to recuperate for a few hundred years. But the result was beyond his expectations. His incarnation was indeed destroyed, and Ji Tianxing was neither dead nor severely injured. It was just that his divine power had been exhausted and he had entered a very weak state. He would need to recuperate for a month to recover. This result was unacceptable to the god of the underworld. Filled with regret and resentment, he dissipated into the void. Of course, although his incarnation was destroyed, his original body knew everything that had happened here. Ji Tianxing could not see into the depths of the void and did not know what the god of the underworld's original body was feeling at this moment. But he guessed that the god of the underworld must be ashamed and depressed, right? After all, the god of the underworld had lost more than just an incarnation. There was also a sword of death, a supreme-grade king-level divine warship, a huge amount of cultivation resources, and 5 divine king powerhouses. That's right. After the god of the underworld's incarnation was destroyed, his sword of death, spatial ring, and supreme-grade divine warship were scattered in the void. When Ji Tianxing was cleaning up the battlefield, he picked up these treasures and took them without hesitation. However, he was already panting from exhaustion and was extremely weak. His face was as pale as paper, and he was sweating profusely. His divine power was also depleted. At this time, he was not in the mood or energy to check the spoils of war. He supported his tottering body, put away the primordial chaos bell, and took out the world in the sword. Then, he entered the world in the sword and went to the Jiutian Tenju Tower to recuperate. The burial of heaven sword flew in the void and quickly left the heavenly lion star. After all, Ji Tianxing had achieved his goal of coming to the heavenly lion star zone. Next, he would leave the heavenly lion star zone and head to the heavenly leader's star zone to meet the sacred dragon emperor and Ji Wuhan. As for the heavenly lion star, Ji Tianxing had no need to return. Regardless of whether it was the dilapidated divine radiance Grotto Heaven or the tens of thousands of foreign race experts in the Grotto Heaven, he did not care about them at all. Anyway, he had already captured the heavenly lion region lord and suppressed him in the divine pagoda. After he finished recuperating and regained his divine power, he would interrogate the heavenly lion region master. Even the sword of death, the supreme grade divine warship, and the space ring of the god of the underworld would have to wait until he had recovered his strength. Shua. The sword of burial of heaven was like a jet-black streak of light as it streaked through the air. It didn't attract anyone's attention. Ji Tianxing also returned to the distorted space-time and sat cross-legged under the Shuiyang sacred tree. He took out a large number of divine pellets and cultivation resources and started to recuperate in seclusion. Although he had exhausted his divine power this time, it would not damage his foundation of the divine path. However, every time he exhausted his divine power like this, it would cause serious damage to his divine body and divine core. Moreover, this was also an action that consumed a lot of potential. If it happened too many times, it would eventually damage his foundation. Of course, Ji Tianxing was aware of these dangers. However, he felt that it was worth it to be able to destroy an incarnation of the god of the underworld and create some trouble for the god of the underworld. At the same time, he had also verified his own strength through this battle. Reality proved that his prediction was correct. He had already surpassed ordinary peak divine kings and was second only to the god emperor. Just like the incarnation of the god of the underworld, his strength was between a peak divine king and a god emperor. Ji Tianxing could not help but speculate. Actually, I'm only at the 9th level of the divine king realm. I haven't become a peak divine king yet, but I can already defeat the incarnation of the god of the underworld. If I become a peak divine king, won't I be comparable to the god emperor who had just broken through? At that time, if I encounter the true body of the god of the underworld, even if I can't defeat him, I won't be in any danger, right? With this comparison, Ji Tianxing could clearly see the difference between his strength and that of the 5 god emperors. This could be said to be a crucial part of his revenge plan. The battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld had destroyed more than half of the divine radiance Grotto Heaven. Boundless void invaded the divine radiance Grotto Heaven, causing a terrifying void storm and turbulence. This caused the hole in the divine radiance Grotto Heaven to become bigger and bigger. Even if the heavenly Tao slowly repaired it, it could not make up for the huge gap. In the end, the divine radiance Grotto Heaven was swallowed by the void bit by bit and completely collapsed. From then on, the most sacred cultivation divine emperor of the heavenly lion planet no longer existed. Tens of thousands of foreign race experts had also fled outside before the divine radiance Grotto Heaven collapsed. They had survived, but they had no home to return to. They fell into chaos and grief. The heavenly lion region lord had been killed, and the divine radiance Grotto Heaven had been destroyed. They did not know where to go. As the news spread, the entire heavenly lion planet fell into panic and worry. No one knew what would happen next. But it would definitely be unrest and turmoil, as expected. A few days later, the news of the heavenly lion region lord's death spread throughout the major planets and was learned by countless star lords. Those star lords looked sad on the surface, but in fact, they were secretly scheming. Many star lords began to accumulate strength, waiting for the opportunity to rise up. There were also some powerful heroes who took the opportunity to rope in other forces, wanting to dominate a region. Some of the more ambitious star lords, who had set their sights on the position of the domain lord, started stirring up trouble. In short, the position of the heavenly lion region lord was vacant, and many people coveted it. The heavenly lion region, which had been peaceful for hundreds of years, was also surging with undercurrents. It was about to enter a state of struggle for supremacy. In any case, many star lords understood one thing. Lord Supremacy only needed an obedient region lord to be his puppet and control the entire heavenly lion region. No matter which Star Lord it was, as long as they met Lord Supremacy's requirements, they would have a chance to become the region lord. It was obvious that the Heavenly Lion region would fall into chaos and war for many years to come. Unless Lord Supremacy personally appointed someone to be the region lord, the chaos would not be quelled until a hero unified the entire region. Many Star Lords had heard about the battle between Lord Supremacy and the white-robed young man, but he was the first to escape into the void. While the Star Lords were shocked and in disbelief, they also doubted Lord Supremacy's strength. Most of the Star Lords thought the same as the tens of thousands of Divine Lords. They all thought that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had boasted too much in the past and praised Lord Supremacy to the heavens. In fact, Lord Supremacy was a peak divine king. Moreover, Lord Supremacy could not defeat the white-robed young man from an alien race. Lord Supremacy, who used to be high and mighty, had lost his sacred halo and his majesty had plummeted. The reverence in the hearts of many Star Lords also decreased by half. Lord Supremacy could not even protect himself. Even if he was not killed by the white-robed young man, his fate would be miserable. In the next few decades, Lord Supremacy would not be able to intervene in the affairs of the Heavenly Lion region. In that case, if not now, when would they fight for the position of the region lord? Chapter 40:16. 10 days later. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was still speeding through the void and had yet to leave the Heavenly Lion sector. The Heavenly Lion sector was too vast. It would have to fly for at least 2 months before it could leave this sector. Even though the entire Heavenly Lion sector was surging with undercurrents and chaos and war were about to erupt. However, the Sword of Burial of Heaven and Ji Tianxing knew nothing about it. 10 days had passed in the outside world. Ji Tianxing had already been in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for 500 days to recuperate. In the past year or so, not only had he healed his injuries and restored his strength to its peak state, but he had also checked his spoils of war. With the identity and status of the god of the underworld, he had countless god kings under his command. The wealth he had accumulated was immeasurable. Of course, 99% of the cultivation resources had been used up when he was exploring the mystery of the grey fog. Even if he had some rare treasures and supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts, he had left them all in the hands of his original body. Therefore, in the spatial ring worn by this incarnation of the god of the underworld, there were only tens of trillions worth of cultivation resources and a large number of supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts. Although those supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts were priceless and very precious treasures. However, the god of the underworld didn't care about them, and neither did Ji Tianxing. These various supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts were all used by the god of the underworld to win people's hearts. After checking the spatial ring, Ji Tianxing was a little disappointed and went to check the Sword of Death. This supreme-grade king-level divine artifact was different from other supreme-grade divine artifacts. It was neither an ancient artifact from the ancient era nor did it have any background or story. It was just an unsuccessful experiment when the god of the underworld tried to refine a top-grade divine artifact after he broke through to the God Emperor realm. After all, the god of the underworld wanted to refine an emperor-grade divine artifact. However, although this Sword of Death contained the power of the heavenly path, it was only supreme-grade king-level and not emperor-grade. The only thing worth praising was that this sword was personally crafted by the god of the underworld and contained a terrifying aura of death. The Netherworld Divine Emperor's doppelganger wielded this sword with exceptional ease, and it also brought out the best in each other. After Ji Tianxing carefully inspected the divine sword, he also lost interest in it and kept it in his interspatial ring. He didn't plan on using the Sword of Death, but he fancied the quality of the Sword of Death. He thought that when he had time in the future, he would reforge the Sword of Death. Or it could be used as a material to fuse with the Burial of Heaven sword and improve the quality of the Burial of Heaven sword. In the end, Ji Tianxing began to check the supreme-grade king-class divine ship left behind by the god of the underworld. To be honest, it had been many years since Ji Tianxing had steered the divine battleship around. He used to own a divine ship as well, but that was a low-end heavenly god-tier ship. He had long since refined it into a material. Now that he had obtained a supreme-grade king-class divine weapon, it would be much more convenient for him to travel in the future. He didn't need to expend his god power, and he didn't need to make the burial of heaven fly all the way. In terms of speed, the supreme-grade king-class divine ship was definitely several times faster than the burial of heaven sword. The doppelganger of the god of the underworld was dead, and the memories of his soul in the divine battleship had also dissipated. The divine battleship now had no owner, and Ji Tianxing could refine it as he pleased. Ji Tianxing spent 4 months in the distorted spacetime before he successfully refined the supreme-grade king-class divine ship of the god of the underworld. One could imagine the fates of the god kings who were hiding in the divine battleship to heal themselves. When Ji Tianxing fought the god of the underworld, the 5 god kings were severely injured and had no choice but to escape into the divine battleship. The 2 god kings who only had their guard hoods left started to heal themselves as soon as they entered the divine battleship. The other 2 god kings who were severely injured and Yang Ju, who was at the peak of the god king realm, had the same reaction. They had blind faith in the god of the underworld and believed that the god of the underworld would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianxing. Therefore, they stayed in the divine battleship to heal themselves and didn't pay attention to what was happening outside. It wasn't until a long time later that Yang Ju realized that something was wrong. He thought that since a few days had passed, his master should have killed Kenshin and left on the divine battleship. However, his master didn't move, and he didn't ask him to take control of the divine battleship. Therefore, Yang Ju stopped healing himself and wanted to find out what was going on. At this time, Ji Tianxing noticed that he was about to leave the divine battleship, and he severely injured Yang Ju with lightning speed. Yang Ju was caught off guard and was hit by Ji Tianxing on the spot. Blood spurted out of his orifices, and his body collapsed. Only then did he realize that since Kenshin was in control of the divine battleship, something bad must have happened to his master. However, he didn't have the chance to fight back, and he couldn't escape from the divine battleship. Ji Tianxing continuously attacked him with his soul and severely injured his godhead, causing him to fall into a coma. After Yang Ju fell into a coma, Ji Tianxing crushed his godhead and killed him completely. After a long time, Ji Tianxing successfully refined the top-grade divine battleship. He couldn't help but smile when he saw that the 4 ninth-stage divine kings were still peacefully healing themselves in the divine battleship. How much confidence do you have? How much faith do you have in the god of the underworld? Forget it, I'll let you die in a daze. Ji Tianxing muttered a few words in a low voice and released a formless soul energy, attacking the 4 divine kings fiercely. The 4 divine kings weren't prepared at all and couldn't resist in time. They were knocked unconscious by him. Ji Tianxing did the same thing to the 4 deity kings, erasing their divine souls and crushing their godheads into dust. Just like that, the 5 divine kings followed in the footsteps of the god of the underworld's incarnation. Ji Tianxing dealt with the spoils of war and took the 5 divine kings' godhead fragments and began to refine them. 2 foreign race god kings and 2 ninth-stage god race god kings were the first to be refined by him. 2 months later, Ji Tianxing refined the godhead fragments of the 4 divine kings. His strength increased slightly, but he also absorbed 10 divine Tao laws. Then, he refined Yang Ju's godhead fragments. Unlike the previous 4 divine kings, Ji Tianxing not only had to absorb Yang Ju's power and divine Tao laws, he also had to refine his memories. This was because Ji Tianxing had heard Yang Ju address the god of the underworld as his master. Since Yang Ju was a peak divine king and a disciple of the god of the underworld, he must be a trusted aide of the god of the underworld. He must know a lot of secrets and inside information. Until now, Ji Tianxing had already fought with the god of the underworld's incarnation. But he still didn't know much about the god of the underworld's situation and plans. Yang Ju's godhead fragments might bring him a surprise. A month later, Yang Ju's godhead fragments were completely refined by Ji Tianxing. He gained a lot. Not only did his strength increase, but he also obtained 15 divine Tao laws. Now, Ji Tianxing had mastered a total of 1,085 divine Tao laws. Other than that, Yang Ju's memories had also given him a lot of benefits. Yang Ju had been following the god of the underworld around the grey fog. He was in charge of commanding and dispatching people. Even though the god of the underworld didn't tell Yang Ju the core secret. Yang Ju didn't know what the grey fog was or why the 5 god emperors were so painstakingly researching it. But Yang Ju understood the situation around the grey fog. He also knew the forces under the god of the underworld and the people he could mobilize. Some of his guesses about the grey fog were his own and had yet to be confirmed.